Welcome back to Harry's Cosmos, the channel where every story begins with a single question. Today's What If? What if Bellatrix chose Harry and Hermione as her heirs instead of serving Voldemort? If you haven't yet, go ahead and smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so a new tale never slips past you. Now settle in, let's begin. Chapter 1, The House That Remained. The news reached her the way cold reaches a body already dying from the outside in. Bellatrix stood at the window of the Lestrange house in Wiltshire and watched the dark mark burn out of the sky. It had hung over the country for a decade, invisible to all but those who carried its twin on their skin, a pressure behind the eyes, a certainty in the blood. Now the certainty was gone. Where it had been there was only November and the smell of wet stone, and a silence so complete she could hear the candles guttering behind her. She pressed 2 fingers to the inside of her left forearm. The mark still lived there, black and precise, but it had gone quiet under her touch, not faded, sleeping. There was a difference, and she was one of perhaps 3 people alive who could feel it. "He is not dead," she said. Behind her, Rodolphus did not answer at once. He had been drinking since the owls started, and the drink made him slow. "The whole country says he's dead. Dumbledore's people are already in the streets. There are Muggles setting off fireworks in Kent. The whole country is a herd of frightened animals that has smelled blood and thinks the wolf has died of it." She turned from the window. The candlelight caught her face and made a stranger of it, all edges. "He is not dead, I would know." Then where is he? That was the question. That was the sickness at the center of the night. She did not know. For 10 years she had known where he was in the way a compass knows north, a low sure hum beneath thought, and now the hum was nothing, and the not knowing was a hole she could feel the wind blow through. Rabistan came in from the front room, pale, his collar undone. "It's true then, Godric's hollow." He went for the Potter brat and he stopped, because there was no verb that fit, no word in the language of his cause for what had happened. "The house is a ruin, the Potters are dead, both of them, and he's gone." Just gone. His robes were found on the floor, empty. His robes, Bellatrix said the words slowly, tasting them for a lie. "And the child, they say the child lives." Rabistan laughed, a thin sound with no floor under it. "A year old. He killed James Potter, he killed the mudblood, and he could not kill a baby. That is what they say." "Do not," Bellatrix said, "repeat what they say to me again." The room adjusted itself around her voice. It always did. She was the smallest of them by half a head, and she was the one the others watched the way you watch a hand near a wand. She sat. She made herself sit, though sitting felt like a thing done by people who still had somewhere to arrive. On the low table between the chairs lay the plans they had made only that morning when the world was still whole. Parchment marked in Rodolphus's cramped hand, the movements of Aurors, the safe houses, the names of those who might be turned. All of it was ash now. All of it had been built on the foundation of him, and the foundation had gone out from under the world between 1 hour and the next. "There's a way to find him," Rodolphus said. He had that look he got before he suggested something he thought was clever. "The Longbottoms, Frank and Alice." Alice was close to the Order's inner circle. "If anyone knows how the Dark Lord was brought low, if anyone knows where his enemies think he's gone, where they'll look for the pieces of him, it's them. They will not tell you." "They will," Rodolphus said, eventually. She understood him. She understood exactly what he was offering her, a room and 2 people in it, and time, and the old bright work of the knife and the wand until the 2 people said something, anything, that could be made to sound like hope. She had done such work before. She was good at it. There had been years when the doing of it had been the nearest thing she had to prayer, an offering laid at the feet of the one she served, proof of a devotion that asked for nothing back. She waited for the old hunger to answer the suggestion. It did not come. In its place was the wind through the hole and a tiredness that went down past the bone into whatever the bone was made of. "You think Alice Longbottom knows where he is," she said. "You think anyone knows? He does not want to be known, Rodolphus. If he wanted to be found, he would call us. The mark would burn. It does not burn, so he cannot, or he will not, and either way your Longbottoms are a comfort you want to give yourself, not a plan." She stood. "Break them if it pleases you. It will not bring him back an hour sooner. Nothing you do tonight will. And what will you do?" She did not have an answer she was willing to say aloud, because the answer had arrived in her without invitation, and it made no sense, and she distrusted intensely anything that made no sense inside her when everything outside her had come apart. She wanted to see the house, not the Longbottoms, Godric's hollow, the place where it had happened, the last place he had stood as a body in the world. She told herself it was strategy, that there might be something in the wreckage, some residue of the magic that had unmade him, some thread to pull. She told herself several sensible things while she fetched her cloak, and she believed none of them, and she went. The village had a church and a churchyard and a war memorial that turned, if you were of the blood, into a statue of a family, a man, a woman, a child in her arms. Bellatrix stood before it in the dark and felt her lip curl. Ministry's little sentiment, the father who had died with his wand across the room from him because he was fool enough to answer the door. The mother who had begged. She had heard the shape of it from the others second hand, but standing here she could feel the residue of the night on the air, the burnt sugar reek of a killing curse cast twice and something else cast after, something that had left a smell like a struck bell, a smell she had no name for and did not like. The cottage stood at the end of the lane. Where the top of it stood, the upper floor had been blown out, the roof open to the sky on one side so that from the road you could see a child's room with its wall gone, a mobile of stars still turning faintly in the wind that came through the wound in the house. There were wards on it, fresh ones, laid in the last hours, order work, sloppy with grief. She unpicked them without hurry. It was the one thing in the whole ruined night that felt like itself, her hands doing what her hands knew, the small, precise cruelties of counterwarding, the wards coming apart like a knot under a fingernail. Inside, the house held the cold of a place the living had already given up on. James Potter lay in the hall where he had fallen. She stepped over him without looking. On the stairs, the smell grew stronger, the bell note under the burnt sugar, and she followed it up into the nursery with her wand lit low. The mudblood was on the floor by the cot. She had put herself between the door and the child, that much was plain from how she lay. Bellatrix looked at her for a moment longer than she meant to. Lily Evans Potter, who had refused every reasonable offer, who had thrown her life across a doorway for a thing that could not walk, and the throwing had accomplished nothing. The child would be dead too by morning, orphaned, the last of a broken line. The child was not dead. He was standing, that was the first wrongness. A year old near enough, and he had pulled himself up on the bars of the cot, and he was standing there in the ruin of his mother's protection, watching the door, watching her come through it. There was blood on his face from a cut on his forehead, a clean line above the eye, and it had already begun to close into a shape, a jagged mark like a rune half-remembered. He did not cry, that was the second wrongness. Children cried when the world ended around them. This one looked at her with his mother's eyes in his father's face, and he did not make a sound, and something in the level of that gaze went into Bellatrix like a splinter. She raised her wand. It would take a word. Less than a word. She had killed people who had done more to earn it than being born to the wrong parents at the wrong turn of the century. This child had unmade her lord. Whatever accident of a mother's dying had shielded him. He was the reason the mark slept and the world had come apart, and she stood in a dead woman's house with the wind coming through the roof. Kill the child and the story closed. Kill the child, and there was at least one thing in the ruin of the night that she had chosen and done and could hold. Avada, the child reached for her, not away, toward. He let go of the bars with one hand and put it out toward the light at the end of her wand, the way a child reaches for anything bright, and he made a sound at last, not a cry, a small interrogative noise up at the end, a question with no words in it yet. Her wand did not finish the word. She stood with it raised and the green not quite summoned behind her teeth, and she could not make the last of it come. She was Bellatrix Lestrange. She had never once in all the years faltered on the downstroke. She told her hand to move, and her hand did not move, and she understood, with a horror that was entirely new and entirely her own, that some part of her older than her devotion had reached out and closed around her wrist from the inside, because she knew the eyes, not the green of them, though the green was the mudbloods, the set of them, the bones of the small face under the blood. She had grown up with those bones, Doria. Great Aunt Doria Black, who had married a Potter and been struck from the tapestry for it, whose face Bellatrix had seen only once, in a locket her grandmother kept and was not supposed to keep, a stern, beautiful woman with the black brow and the black jaw, and here it was again, small and unfinished, looking up at her out of the wreck of Godric's hollow. Black blood, diluted, disowned, burned off the family tree 3 generations back, but blood, she could feel it. It was the one sense that had not gone quiet when the mark went quiet. The old black instinct for its own, the thing that had made her family what it was before it made her family monstrous, the pull toward the line, toward the name, toward the continuance of a thing older than any lord. The tapestry in her mind's eye, the great black tree at Grimmauld Place with its centuries of gold thread, had been burning down her whole life. Sirius gone, Regulus dead in some way no one would speak of. Andromeda scorched off for love of a Muggle-born, her own line ending in her because she had given her body to the cause and her cause had eaten her years and left nothing growing. The House of Black was a fire eating itself, and here in a dead house was a green shoot that had come up from a root everyone thought long dead. Her master would want it burned. The thought arrived clean and cold, and she looked at it the way she had not looked at any thought all night. He would want it burned. He had gone to this house to burn it, the last of a line that might one day trouble him, and it had cost him his body, and if he came back, when he came back, he would want the job finished. She had spent 10 years wanting what he wanted, learning to want it before he had to say it, and the wanting had been the whole architecture of herself. And what had he left growing? What had all of it grown? All the burning, all the offerings. A country of frightened animals and a nursery full of the dead and a mark asleep on her arm and no north to walk toward. He had promised her the old world made new, the sacred houses restored, the blood exalted. She had believed it the way you believe the ground, and she stood now in the ash of it and saw, with the terrible clarity that comes once and never softens, that he had not been restoring the old houses. He had been feeding them into himself, Regulus. The blacks who had died in his service and left no heirs. He did not exalt the blood, he spent it. He would spend this last drop of it too, gladly, and call it purity, and she had been the knife he spent it with. The child made the questioning sound again and leaned so far toward her light that he began to overbalance, and Bellatrix's arm came up and caught him before her mind had agreed to anything at all. He was heavier than she expected and warmer, a live weight against her forearm, and he took a fistful of her hair the instant he was lifted, the way drowning things grab and held on. She stood very still. She had held a wand to 1,000 throats, and she did not know how to hold this. It required a different set of muscles, a different arrangement of the body, arms curved to keep rather than to strike, and the unfamiliarity of it frightened her more than any duel ever had. Towdr's purr, she said to him, because she did not have other words ready, and those were the oldest she owned. Always pure, the family motto, a lie she had killed for. She looked at the disowned black blood drying on his brow into the shape of a scar, and she heard herself say the words again, differently, not as a boast, but as a vow taken over a thing she meant to keep. Always, yours and mine, do you hear me? He did not hear her. He was a year old, and he was falling asleep against her collarbone with his fist in her hair, worn out from surviving, and the trust of that, the animal, thoughtless trust of a thing that had no reason left to trust anyone, undid something in her chest that 10 years of devotion had welded shut. Downstairs, a door opened, heavy footsteps and a heavier voice muffled, calling a name, Hagrid. The oaf, come on the orders errand to fetch the child away to whatever safe grey life Dumbledore had planned for him, some Muggle house, some hiding of the blood among people who could not even see it. Bellatrix looked once more at Lily Potter on the floor of the room. You threw yourself across the door for him, she said low. So will I. You have my word, mudblood, and it is worth more than you'd think, because it is the only thing about me that never once broke. Then she wrapped the sleeping child inside her cloak, against the drum of her own heart, and turned on the spot, and the ruined nursery folded away to nothing around her. She could not go to Wiltshire. That was the first thing she understood when the world resolved again, and she was standing on a cold hillside with a child breathing against her throat. She could not go to Rodolphus, who was at that hour learning nothing from the Longbottoms and enjoying the not learning. She could not go to any of them. The instant they saw what she carried, they would know two things, that the Dark Lord would want it dead, and that Bellatrix Lestrange had walked out of Godric's hollow with it alive and warm and named in her mind already. There was no version of that they would allow to keep standing. She had, in the space of an hour, made herself an enemy of the only people she had called her own for a decade. She turned the thought over and found she did not care, and the not caring was so total and so sudden that she stood on the hillside and laughed once silently at the size of it. The child stirred at the movement of her chest and settled again. She needed a place no one living knew belonged to the Blacks. Grimmauld Place was out, her Aunt Walburga still rattled around in it, and the house was known to too many, watched by too many. The Lestrange vault, the Malfoy holdings, anything tied to her married name or her sister's, all of it was a lantern she could not light. But the Blacks were an old family, and old families hoard property the way old men hoard grievances, and there were places on the deeds that no one had visited in 100 years, places her grandfather had spoken of once and never again. There was the Eyrie. It came to her whole, a narrow stone house on a spur of rock above a Welsh valley, built by a Black 3 centuries gone for a wife who could not bear the company of others, hidden under so many layers of concealment that the family itself had half forgotten it. Its location passed down not on any deed, but in the blood, keyed to the line so that only one who carried it could find the door. Her grandfather had taken her there once when she was small, before she was anything, and made her put her hand to the threshold stone so the house would know her. She had not thought of it in 20 years. She thought of it now with a clarity that felt like a gift from some part of herself she had left behind when she took the mark. She apparated in 3 jumps, doubling back, laying false trails a colder version of herself had taught her to lay, and came at last to the foot of the rock in the deep dark before dawn, and climbed the last of it on foot with the child inside her cloak, because the concealment on the place would not let her come to the door any other way. The house did not want to be found. She could feel it not wanting to be found, the very stone of the valley conspiring to turn her eye aside, and she walked into that resistance with her black blood held out before her like a torch, and the resistance parted, grudging, and let her through. The threshold stone was where memory had kept it. She knelt and pressed her palm to it. The child balanced against her and spoke her name into the dark. Bellatrix of the House of Black. For a long moment nothing. The house tasting her, comparing the woman kneeling on its step to the small girl it had met once 40 years ago, weighing the blood against the years and the mark and everything she had done with them. Then the door remembered her and opened. The inside of the Eyrie was a museum of a family's private self. Dust lay over everything in a gray felt an inch deep. There were chairs that no one had sat in since before her mother was born, and books swollen with damp, and on the wall of the main room a small tapestry, a cadet copy of the great one at Grimmauld, showing the branch of the tree that had settled here and then thinned and then stopped. The last name stitched on it had been dead for a century. The thread that would have continued the line hung loose, unworked, a gold end going nowhere. She set the child down in the least ruined chair, and he woke and looked at the strange dark room, and his face began the slow crumple that meant a cry was coming. She had perhaps 4 seconds before it arrived. She used them badly. She lit every candle in the room at once with a slash of her wand, which was the wrong thing, too bright, too fast, and he flinched, and the cry broke over him and filled the dead house with the first living sound it had heard in 100 years. Bellatrix, who had faced horrors and giants and the wrath of her own lord without flinching, stood in the middle of the room and had no idea what to do. She tried silence, the reflex of her whole adult life, a sharp word to make a thing stop making noise. It did not work on him, it made it worse. She tried picking him up and he arched away from her, red-faced, furious with grief he had no words for. She tried absurdly reason, telling him in a low, even voice that he was safe now, that the house was warded, that she would let nothing in, and the sound of her voice was the only thing all night that had gone into him without a fight, so she kept talking. She told him about the house. She told him about the tapestry and the loose gold thread. She told him the family motto, and then, because it was a lie, she told him the truth she had decided on it in the nursery, that pure meant only this, that she would put herself across the door. She told him her sister Andromeda used to sing to her when the shouting in the house at Grimmauld got too loud, and that she could not remember the words, and she hummed the tune she could remember, tuneless, half wrong, in a voice that had forgotten it could make that shape. He stopped crying somewhere in the middle of the tune. Not because it was good, because it was hers, and it had not stopped, and he was a year old and exhausted past the end of himself, and the one fixed thing in his broken world was the sound of a voice that would not go away. He slept before she finished. She stood holding him a while longer, afraid to set him down, watching the candlelight move on the loose gold thread of the tapestry, and she made, without ceremony, the largest decision of her life. She would not wait for her master to return and command this child's death. She would not serve a lord who spent the blood he claimed to worship. The devotion that had been the whole shape of her, the thing she had poured every year of her youth into, she took up now like a vessel and turned it over and poured it out onto the floor of the dead house, and filled the empty vessel with something else, and she was too honest, even in the privacy of her own skull, to pretend the something else was small. It was the same devotion. That was the terrible truth of her, the thing that made her dangerous now in a new direction. She did not have a smaller way to love. She had only the one enormous, unstable, all-consuming way, and she had just aimed it, after 40 wasted years, at something worth aiming it at. Harry, she said, trying the name the mudblood had given him. It fit poorly in her mouth, a soft, ordinary name for a thing that was going to be neither. She tried it again with the weight she meant to put behind it. Harry Black, the tapestry on the walls stirred. She felt it before she saw it, the way she had felt the airy tasting her on the step, old magic waking to a thing it recognized. She turned. On the small cadet tapestry, where the last gold thread of the branch hung loose and unworked, the thread had begun very slowly to move. It climbed. It found the place where a new name would go, below the last of the dead, and it began to stitch itself into letters, gold on black, and Bellatrix watched the House of Black write a new name into itself for the first time in 100 years, and she did not have a name for what she felt, so she did not try to give it one. She only stood holding the child who slept and watched him become, thread by thread, hers. Under the new gold letters, the tapestry left a space. She understood the space. It was the width of another name. The line did not intend to continue with one green shoot alone. The magic that governed such things knew that a house was not remade by a single heir, that one thread could be cut and end everything again. It wanted a pair, a redundancy, a second name to make the first secure. She did not know that night whose name would fill the space. She only marked that it was there, and that the tapestry had left it open, and that some part of the old magic was already looking for the other half of what it needed. Dawn came gray through the one clean window. Bellatrix had not slept. She had spent the hours doing the work that steadied her, the work of the wand, closing the area against the world, layering ward on ward until the house was a stone inside a fist inside a shadow, keying every one of them to her blood and to his, so that the two of them could pass where nothing else could. She was very good at it. It was the first thing all night she had been entirely good at, and the doing of it returned her to herself by degrees, so that by the time the light came she was Bellatrix again, only pointed now in a direction none of her old life would recognize. She was standing at the clean window with a cup she had cleaned of a century's dust, a chipped teacup with the black crest worn nearly to nothing on its side, when the wards at the outermost layer flickered. Someone was on the valley road below. Not at the house could not be found, but near and searching and carrying magic she knew. She set the cup down without a sound and went out into the cold to meet it before it could come nearer to the child. The figure on the road resolved as she descended the rock into her younger sister. Narcissa stood in the gray light in a traveling cloak, her hood back, her pale hair the one bright thing in the whole gray valley, and she looked up at Bellatrix coming down the rock toward her with an expression that was doing a great deal of work to remain composed. How Narcissa had found even the valley, if not the house, Bellatrix did not stop to ask. There were arts the sisters had shared as girls, ways of finding one another that predated any lord or any mark. "They are looking for you," Narcissa said when Bellatrix was close enough not to need to shout. Rodolphus, Rabistan. They went to Godric's Hollow at first light to see the place for themselves, and they found the wards undone from the inside and a woman's tracks in the ash and no child in the cot. Her eyes moved to Bellatrix's arms, empty, and then, understanding, to the rock above and the house she could feel but not see. Bella, what have you done? What none of them had the wit or the blood to do. She stopped 3 feet from her sister. She did not embrace her. The Black sisters did not embrace. They had been raised out of the habit early. I have found the thing the family has been dying for want of, and I have taken it out of the reach of the man who would burn it to warm his hands. The man you served. The past tense came out of her like a tooth. Look at me, sissy, you know my face. You have known it since before either of us could lie with it. Look at it now and tell me I am lying. Narcissa looked, whatever she had come down the valley expecting. She had not expected this, and it took her a moment to find it in her sister's face, the thing that had changed, the north that had moved. When she found it, her composure faltered for the first time. You mean it, she said very quietly. You've turned for a Potter child. For a black child, Bellatrix said. The Potter is what the world will call him. What he is the last living drop of Doria's line, and I will see the House of Black stand again on his shoulders, or I will die on the rock up there defending the attempt, and I find I do not much care which. The Dark Lord is not dead. No, he is not. Bellatrix said it steadily, and it was the steadiness that told Narcissa how much had changed, because the old Bellatrix could not have said those words without the light coming up in her, the terrible glad light, and now there was no light in them at all, only fact. He will come back. It may be a year, it may be 10. And when he comes back he will find that his most faithful took the one thing he died for and made it her heir, and he will come for me, and for the child, and for anyone standing near us. I know this, I have counted the cost. I counted it in a dead woman's nursery with the roof gone over my head. She looked at her sister, and something in the look was almost gentle, which on Bellatrix's face was more frightening than any of her rages. You should go home to your husband and your own child and forget you found this valley. I mean that kindly, which you know is not a thing I say. Lucius will run to the Dark Lord's memory the instant it's safe to. Do not be standing beside me when he does. Narcissa did not go. She stood in the gray road and looked at the rock above them, and something worked behind her pale face. Draco is 15 months old, she said at last. It did not seem to be an answer to anything. Then it was. I did not understand before he was born what it would mean. I thought I understood everything I had agreed to. I signed my name to it, Bella. I signed it gladly. And then they put him in my arms, and I understood that I had signed a thing I had no right to sign, that I had promised a world to men who would spend my son the way they spent Regulus. Her eyes came back down to her sister. You are not the only one who counted a cost while holding a child. I only did not have the courage to do anything about mine but hope. The sisters looked at each other in the road, 2 daughters of the burning house, and did not embrace because they had never learned how. But Narcissa reached out and took her sister's hand, the left one, and turned it over and pressed her thumb once to the sleeping mark on the inside of the forearm, the way you press a bruise to see if it still aches, and Bellatrix let her. I cannot stand beside you where it can be seen, Narcissa said. Lucius would know, he would tell them, or worse, he would use it. But there are things I can do that cannot be seen. Money moves without a name on it. Books can be lost from the Malfoy library and found in a valley in Wales. If a child is to be raised as a black, he will need what a black is owed, and you cannot get it for him without showing your face in the world, and your face is the most hunted face in Britain as of this morning. She let go of the hand. Let me be the part of this that no one looks at. It is the only part I am brave enough for. You were always the clever one, Bellatrix said, and it was not quite a thank you because she did not have those either, but Narcissa had known her 40 years and heard the shape of one inside it. Narcissa left before the light was full, back up the valley road, back to a husband who would spend the next 13 years believing his wife thought only what he thought. He came at noon, which meant he had followed the same instinct Narcissa had and been slower to trust it. Bellatrix felt the outer ward flex a second time and knew the touch of the magic that flexed it before she reached the door. Rodolphus had never been able to hide the flavor of his own casting from her. 10 years of sharing a wand arm at a dozen ambushes had taught her the taste of it the way you learn a spouse's step on the stair. She went down the rock to keep him off it. He was standing where Narcissa had stood at the foot of the spur, and he had brought Rabistan, which told her he had already half-guessed and had wanted a witness or a second wand. Both men looked up at her with the particular readiness of people who have rehearsed being reasonable and do not expect it to hold. You left tracks in the ash, Rodolphus said, small ones, a woman's. And you undid order wards from the inside, which no one in the order can do, and only one woman I know does that cleanly. He looked at her empty arms and then past her up at the rock in the concealment he could feel but not pierce. Tell me the child is dead, Bella. Tell me you went to that house to finish what our Lord began, and you carried the body off to burn where the oaf couldn't make a shrine of it, and I will believe you because I want to. Then you will be believing a lie, she said, and I have never once lied to you, Rodolphus, which is more than you have ever managed for me. The reasonableness went out of his face by degrees. He is a Potter. He is a Black, and he is mine. She had not raised her wand. She wanted them to notice that she had not raised her wand, that she did not think she would need it, that the arithmetic of this had already been done, and they were on the wrong side of the answer. You went to Godric's Hollow to look for a corpse and a clue. I went to look at the thing our Lord died to kill, and I looked at it, and I saw the House of Black in its face, and I chose. Do you understand the word I chose, not for him, not for the cause, for the name that was mine before I ever knew his? He'll come back, Rabistan said low, the way a man names a thing he is afraid of to make it obey him. You know he will. And when he does, he will find me standing on this rock with a wand in my hand and something behind me worth the standing. She said it without heat, which was the frightening way, the way that had once made grown wizards go quiet in rooms. You may tell him where I am, I will not stop you. But you will tell him from the bottom of this valley, and you will not take a step up this rock while I draw breath, and you know, both of you know, you have watched me work for a decade, exactly how many breaths I have in me and exactly how much they cost. Rodolphus looked at her a long moment. He had married her out of the same cold arrangement that made all their marriages, and there had been a year early when he had thought there might be something under the arrangement, and had learned there was not, that the only thing under Bellatrix's arrangements was Bellatrix. He looked at her now and saw that the one thing he had never been able to reach in her, the buried live thing, had come up out of the ground at last and was standing on the rock above him with its wand not yet raised, and that it had come up for a Potter child and not for him, and whatever was in his face then he turned away before she could name it. You've killed us, he said, all of us. When he learns what you've done he will not care who else was loyal. You've made every one of us a thing he has to prove he still commands, over a baby. I have unkilled one of us, Bellatrix said. You are welcome to be the other if you ever find the blood for it. Go home, Rodolphus. The next man who sets foot on my rock leaves it in pieces, and I would rather it not be you, for old arrangement's sake. They went. She watched them out of the valley, two dark figures diminishing on the white road, and she did not lower her guard until the outer ward had sealed behind them and the taste of Rodolphus's magic had faded off the air. Then she climbed the rock again, back through the wards, back into the dead house that was no longer entirely dead, and found the child awake in the chair where she had left him, not crying, watching the door for her. She saw that. He had woken alone in a strange dark room, and he had not screamed the house down. He had fixed his eyes on the door his person had gone through and waited for it to bring her back, and when she came through it his whole small body changed, loosened, the vigilance going out of it because the thing it was keeping had returned. She had been watched by a great many people in her life, watched with fear, with hate, with the flinching deference of men who knew what she could do. No one had ever watched a door for her to come back through it. She stood in the doorway and let it land, the whole strange weight of being someone's return, and it was heavier than the child and heavier than the wards and heavier than the enmity of every wizard in Britain, and she found she could carry it, that she wanted to carry it, that she had been built her whole life to carry exactly this, and had wasted the strength on lesser things. You are hungry, she informed him, because he had begun the crumple again and she was learning to read its weather. She had no earthly idea what a child of a year ate. She would learn it the way she had learned every difficult thing, by force and by failure and by refusing to be beaten by it. She crossed the room and picked him up, better this time, her arms remembering the shape from the night, and he took his fistful of her hair by long habit already, a habit one night old, and held on. Harry Black, she said again, and again the loose gold thread on the wall stirred and steadied, the name holding. That is who you are, that is who you will be when everyone who remembers the other name is dust, and I will tell you a thing now while you are too small to hold it against me, so that I have said it once out loud in the honest morning. She looked down at him, at Doria's brow and the mudblood's eyes and the scar drying into its rune. I have done terrible things. I am going to spend the rest of my life being the terrible thing that stands between you and everything worse than me. That is the only redemption I have any use for, not to become gentle, to become yours. The child pulled her hair and made his questioning sound up at the end, and it was not an answer because he had no words yet, and it did not need to be. She carried him to the clean window where the gray valley was going gold at its edges, and she showed him the light, and somewhere very far to the east, on the inside of her forearm, the sleeping mark lay quiet and did not burn and did not yet know what she had done. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. Towders Purr the house elf came up out of the cellar on the third day, and it took Bellatrix a moment to understand that the small gray shape edging along the wainscot was not vermin but staff. It was very old, older than any elf she had seen, its skin gone the color of the dust it had lived in, its ears cracked at the edges like old leather. It had kept itself hidden while the house held only strangers. Now the black blood had come back to the area and woken the binding that had lain over the creature for 100 years, and it crept out to look at the ones who had woken it, and when it saw the small tapestry on the wall with a new name freshly stitched in gold, it lowered itself to the floorboards and pressed its forehead to them. Cobb was kept, it said in a voice like a hinge. Cobb was kept, and Cobb waited, and the house has come home. Get up, Bellatrix said. She was holding Harry against her hip and had been in the middle of the daily war over porridge, and she had no patience to spare for ceremony. If you are staff, be staff. This one needs feeding, and I have been doing it wrong for 3 days. He wears more of the food than he eats. Cobb rose. He looked at the child on her hip with rheumy eyes, and at the scar, and at the green of the eyes above it, and whatever an elf that old could read in a face he read there. A child of the house, he said. Cobb has not fed a child of the house since the young master before the last. Cobb remembers how. He held up 2 gray fingers. You are holding him too high, mistress. A child eats from the lap, not the hip, and the porridge wants honey, which is why he fights you. Cobb will bring honey. That was the beginning of the household. Bellatrix would not have chosen it. She had spent her adult life among people who could hold a wand, and now her whole world had narrowed to a stone house on a rock, a child who fought porridge, and an elf who remembered the feeding of children dead 2 centuries. She found, to her considerable irritation, that she did not want it to widen again. The world thought it knew where Harry Potter was, which was the great advantage of the whole arrangement. Narcissa brought the news up the valley as she brought everything, wrapped in other business, a parcel of books left at the foot of the rock with a note tucked between the pages in the sisters' old girlhood cipher. Dumbledore had put it about that the Potter child was hidden, safe with blood relations, protected by magic older and deeper than anything the Dark Lord's remnant could break. The wizarding world had swallowed it whole. There were pilgrims who left flowers at the ruin of Godric's Hollow. There were children who slept under posters of a baby they had never met, and every one of them believed, because Dumbledore had said it and Dumbledore did not lie in ways you could catch, that the boy who lived was warded away in some secret ordinary house, growing up quiet, waiting for the day the world would need him. The old man had lied cleanly, because he did not know it was a lie. He thought he had hidden the child. He had gone to Godric's Hollow the morning after and found the cot empty and the wards undone, and he had made a choice Bellatrix could only guess at, to tell the world the child was safe rather than admit he had lost him, and to spend the years since searching very quietly for the truth behind his own story. She could feel that search sometimes at the edges of her wards, a gentle probing, patient, nothing like a Death Eater's blade. He was looking. He had not found the valley. But he was the one searcher in Britain she genuinely feared, because he did not search with force, and force was the only thing her rock knew how to turn away. He will find you eventually, Narcissa's note said in the cipher. Not this year, perhaps not this decade, but he does not stop and he does not forget, and one day there will be an owl on your rock with his seal on it. Decide now what you will do when it comes, so you do not have to decide it in the moment. Bellatrix read the note twice and burned it, and did not decide, because there was no deciding a thing like Dumbledore in advance. She put the books on the shelf instead. They were the ones Harry would need in a few years, primers of a wizarding childhood, a first reader with moving pictures, and beneath them, at the bottom of the parcel where Narcissa had hidden the true gift, 3 volumes bound in black with the black crest tooled into the leather. The family arts, the old deep black magic, taken quietly from the Malfoy library by a wife whose husband would never miss them, because he had never once opened them himself. A child raised as a black heir would need to know what a black heir was owed and what a black heir could do. Narcissa had understood that before Bellatrix had thought to ask. It was that winter that Harry did his first magic, and it told her, more than any book, what she was raising. He was 3 and furious about a door. Cobb had shut him out of the kitchen while a pot was hot for his own safety, and Harry had stood in the passage and hammered on the door with both small fists, and then, when the hammering failed, had gone very still and very red and looked at the door with a concentration far beyond his years, and the door had come off its hinges. Not blown apart, the way accidental magic usually threw a thing, lifted clean off its iron pins and set down gently against the passage wall, so that the way was open and nothing was broken. A 3-year-old's tantrum expressed not as destruction, but as a precise and bloodless removal of the obstacle. Bellatrix came at the noise of the hinges and found him standing in the open doorway looking at the door he had taken down, and Cobb frozen at the stove with the pot in his hands, and she understood 2 things at once. The first was that the power in him was real and large, larger than a child's accidents had any business being, the kind of raw strength that turned up once in a generation, and usually got its owner killed young for want of anyone to teach it discipline. The second was subtler and mattered more. He had been angry enough to break the door, and he had not broken it. Even in a tantrum, even at 3, some grain in him had chosen the way that harmed the least. She had spent her life among people whose power ran to ruin. Here was power that ran, without being taught to, toward the careful thing. You took the door off, she said. It was in the way, Harry told her with the injured dignity of the very small. Yes, she agreed, it was. She looked at the door leaning tidily against the wall unbroken, and she made a decision she had not known she was going to make until she heard herself make it. I am going to teach you, she said. Not yet, when you are older. But I am going to teach you what you are and what you can do, so that you are never again a person who takes a door down because he does not know a gentler way to open it. Do you understand me? He did not. He was 3. But he nodded because she was looking at him as she did when a thing was important, and he had already learned to nod at that look and grow into the meaning later. She had thought she knew what it would cost to keep him. She had counted the enmity of both sides, the years of hiding, the day the mark would burn again. She had not counted the smaller costs, and it was the smaller ones that ambushed her. She had not slept a whole night since Godric's Hollow. Harry woke twice, 3 times, some nights more, and each time the first sound of him brought her up out of bed with her wand already lit, because the part of her that had lived a decade at war did not know how to tell the difference between a child's cry and an alarm ward tripping. She would stand over the cot with her heart going and her wand throwing hard white light around a room that held no enemy, only a small person who had woken cold or thirsty or frightened by a dream too big for the words he did not yet have, and she would have to stand there and make the war readiness drain back down out of her arm before she could bend and pick him up. It took months to learn the difference. It took longer to learn that she was allowed to be slow, that a crying child was a thing you could go to gently instead of arriving at like an ambush. Cobb watched her learn it and said nothing, which she came to understand was the elf's way of teaching. He let her be wrong until being wrong became unbearable, and then he set the honey pot or the warmed milk or the folded blanket at her elbow where she would find it and think she had thought of it herself. The nights were the danger. In daylight she had tasks, wards to renew, the endless small governance of a child, and the tasks held her together. At night, when Harry finally slept and the house went quiet on its rock, the quiet let the old things back in. She dreamed of her lord, not of his fall, of his presence, the low sure hum of him behind her thoughts, the way it had felt to be pointed, to be a wand in a hand that never doubted where to aim. She would wake from those dreams with the mark aching on her arm and her whole body turned toward a north that was no longer there, and for a few gray seconds before she remembered, she would want it back, want the certainty, want to be the terrible, glad instrument she had been, and the wanting shamed her more than anything she had ever done awake. One such night she came up out of the dream badly. She was on her feet before she knew the floor was under her, wand out, the killing word half-shaped, and the room was dark and the room was wrong, and there was a small pale movement near the door, and she very nearly, Harry had climbed out of his cot. He had learned to that week. He had come padding through the dark to her door on his own 2 feet, 3 years old, because he had heard her cry out in her sleep and had come to see. He stood in the doorway in a nightshirt Cobb had made too long for him, holding the frame, looking at his person standing over her own bed with a lit wand and murder in the set of her, and he was not afraid. That was the thing that undid her. He should have been afraid. Any creature with sense would have been afraid of what she was in that moment. He looked at the wand and at her face, and he let go of the doorframe and crossed the room to her, unsteady, and put his arms around her leg because it was as high as he could reach, and held on. The wand went out, not by any spell. Her hand simply opened and let the light die, because you could not hold a killing charm and a child in the same body at the same time. The one drove the other out. She got down on the floor with him because her legs would not keep her up, and she held him in the dark, and she was shaking, and he patted her shoulder with a small flat hand as she patted his when he woke from his own bad dreams, giving her back the only comfort he had ever been taught, and she let him, and she wept once silently into his hair, which she had not done since she was younger than he was. Bad dream, he told her with enormous authority. It was one of the few phrases he had entire. Yes, she said, her voice came out wrong, she mended it. A bad dream. It is gone now, go back to your cot. No, he tightened his arms on her. Stay. She stayed. She sat on the cold floor of the airy with her back against the bed and Harry asleep against her chest, and she did not dream again that night because she did not sleep, because she had understood something on that floor that she needed the dark hours to hold still and look at. The old certainty wanted her back. It would keep wanting her back in the nights for years, perhaps forever. You did not pour 10 years of yourself into a thing and then have the vessel come clean. But the certainty was not the strongest thing in her any longer. The strongest thing in her was asleep against her sternum with its fist in her collar, and it did not care in the least that she was terrible, and it had crossed a dark room toward the terror because the terror was hers, and it had won. Harry was for the winter he nearly died, and it was the fever that drove her to her sister. Cobb knew a great deal, but Cobb was an elf, and elf magic could not touch a wizard child's illness. The fever came up out of nothing on a black night in January, and by dawn Harry was a small furnace in his cot, glassy-eyed, not knowing her, saying words to people who were not in the room. Bellatrix did everything she knew. She knew a great deal about hurting bodies and almost nothing about mending them. It was the shape of the education she had chosen, and she cursed the choice now with a thoroughness that frightened the elf. Cooling charms brought the fever down, and it climbed back. By midday Harry had stopped saying words at all, and lay in the cot breathing too fast and too shallow, and Bellatrix stood over him with her useless wand and understood that she was going to lose him to childhood fever after everything, that the House of Black was going to end a second time on the same rock, and that there was exactly one person in Britain who could help her, and who would not immediately sell her to the Aurors for the reward. She had not spoken to Andromeda in 15 years. She had helped burn her off the family tapestry with her own wand, a scorch mark where a sister's name had been, because Andromeda had married a Muggle-born and the family had required its daughters to hold the wands that erased her. Bellatrix had held hers. She had believed then that she was defending something. She wrapped Harry in every blanket the house owned, and she took him down the rock, out through her own wards into the winter, and she apparated to the last address she had for her sister, a modest house on the edge of a Muggle town with a garden gone to frost, and she stood on the step of it with a dying child in her arms and knocked on the door of the woman she had helped exile. Andromeda opened it. 15 years had put gray in her hair and lines at her mouth, and she looked so like their mother in the doorway light that Bellatrix's breath stopped for a moment on the resemblance. Andromeda looked at her sister on the step, at the most hunted face in Britain, at the child in her arms, and every muscle in her went hard. "Whatever this is," she said, "you can turn around and take it back to whatever hole you crawled out of. He is dying." Bellatrix had never in her life said a sentence and meant so little to keep her pride in the saying of it. "Fever, 2 days. I have brought it down 4 times and it climbs back, and now he does not know me. I know what I am to you. I know what I did. I helped hold the wand that burned you off the wall, and I am not going to stand on your step and pretend I did not. But you are a healer, Andromeda. You were always the one of us who could mend a thing, and I have no one else, and he is 4 years old. And if he dies on this step because you and I hate each other, then we are exactly what our mother made us, and I would rather die than be that." Something moved through Andromeda's hard face. She looked at the child, really looked at the scar under the sweat-dark hair, and she was clever. Her whole family was clever, and Bellatrix watched her arrive at the arithmetic. "That is the Potter boy," she said very quietly. "The one the whole country's been told is hidden away safe. You took him. You took the boy who lived, and you've been—" She stopped. She looked from the scar to Bellatrix's face and back, and whatever she had been about to accuse crumbled against what she was seeing, which was her sister, the coldest creature the House of Black had ever produced, standing in the frost with tears frozen on her face, begging for a child's life. "Give him to me," Andromeda said. "Merlin, help me, give him here." The fever broke a little before midnight in the spare bedroom of a Muggle-born's house, under the hands of the sister Bellatrix had helped exile. Andromeda worked for 6 hours without stopping. She knew things Bellatrix had never bothered to learn, the humble, deep arts of the body, the potions that had to be brewed fresh and given warm, the charms that eased breathing, the difference between a fever that would burn out and a fever that had gone into the lungs. This one had gone into the lungs. Andromeda's husband Ted, a broad, kind man who took one look at Bellatrix Lestrange in his spare room and decided visibly to be brave about it, went out into the frozen garden to gather the one herb the potion needed and could not be bought at that hour, and came back with his hands cut from breaking the frozen stems, and did not complain, and Bellatrix did not know what to do with a man who would bleed for a child that was nothing to him, so she said nothing and watched him. And carried the watching away with her as a thing she did not understand and would have to. Their daughter watched from the stairs. Nymphadora, 8 years old, hair cycling through colors she had not yet learned to hold steady, sat on the 4th step with her arms around her knees and watched the terrible aunt she had heard about in whispers hold a sleeping child and never once take her eyes off him. Somewhere in the 6th hour the girl came down and sat on the floor near Bellatrix, not too near, and offered her, without a word, a biscuit off a plate, because it was the thing an 8-year-old had to give. Bellatrix looked at the biscuit and at the child holding it out and took it, because refusing seemed suddenly the crueler thing, and ate it, and the girl's hair went briefly, a satisfied gold. When the fever broke, Andromeda sat back on her heels beside the bed and let out a breath that had 15 years in it. Harry's breathing had gone deep and even. The furnace had cooled. He turned in his sleep and reached, as he always did, for a fistful of something to hold, and finding no hair within reach took the edge of the blanket instead and slept on. "He'll keep now," Andromeda said. "Keep him warm 3 days, broth, not solids, till the day after tomorrow. If the cough comes back wet, that's the lungs again, and you bring him to me, do you hear me? You do not try to be clever with it yourself." She got up off the floor with the stiffness of a woman who had knelt too long, and she looked at her sister across the sleeping child, and the 15 years stood up between them in the room, and neither of them pretended it was not there. "I am not doing this for you," she said. "I want that understood. I would not cross the road for you. I am doing it because there is a child, and because whatever you were when you helped them burn me, you carried him through a Welsh winter to the one door in Britain that might open, and that is not nothing. It is not forgiveness, but it is not nothing." "I did not come for forgiveness," Bellatrix said. "I came for the fever. You have broken the fever. I will not trespass on more than that." "You will," Andromeda said with the flat certainty of an older sister, which she was, by 2 years, a fact Bellatrix had spent her whole life resenting. "He is going to be ill again. Children are, and you are going to come back to this door because there is no other door, and I am going to open it because there is a child behind you every time, so let us not pretend this was the once." She looked down at Harry, and something in her hard face eased by a degree. "What do you call him?" "You'll not be calling him Potter up on whatever rock you've hidden." "Black," Bellatrix said. "Harry Black. The tapestry took the name the first night. He is Doria's line come back." Andromeda was quiet a moment. Tauger's purr, she said, and there was an old bitterness in it, the motto that had cost her a family. Then she looked at the Muggle-born husband bandaging his own cut hands in the doorway, and at her half-Muggle daughter asleep now against the banister with her hair gone soft brown, and at the Potter child breathing easy in the bed, all of them under one roof on one winter night, and the bitterness turned into something Bellatrix could not follow her into. Pure, Andromeda said. Look at this room, Bella, and tell me what's pure in it. I could tell you. It took me 15 years and a good man and a daughter to learn it. Maybe you'll learn it faster. You always were quicker than me at everything but this. They came back to that door many times over the years that followed. Andromeda had been right about that, as she was right about most things in the maddening way of older sisters. A cut that would not close, a bone Harry broke falling out of the one climbable tree on the rock, the ordinary catastrophes of a childhood. Each time Bellatrix carried him down the mountain, and each time the door opened, and slowly, without either sister ever admitting it was happening, the visits stopped being emergencies and started being visits. Harry grew up with a great aunt who could turn her nose into a pig's snout to make him laugh, and a much older cousin who let him ride on her back and taught him rude words Bellatrix then had to unteach, and a great uncle Ted who was the first man Harry ever saw be gentle, and who therefore taught him without teaching him anything that men could be. It was Ted who taught him to fish, which was a thing no member of the House of Black had done in living memory. He took Harry down to a Muggle reservoir one gray Saturday with a hamper and 2 rods and a tin of worms, and Bellatrix, who had insisted on coming and had spent the whole outing standing on the bank in a Muggle coat that fit her badly, watched her heir sit for 3 hours beside a broad kind man doing nothing productive whatsoever, and catch one small fish, and be prouder of it than she had ever been of anything she had done with a wand. On the drive home in Ted's rattling Muggle car, Harry fell asleep against the big man's arm with the fish forgotten in its bucket, and Ted drove one-handed the rest of the way so as not to wake him, and caught Bellatrix's eye in the mirror, and said nothing, and she said nothing, and something was understood between the mass murderer and the Muggle-born that neither of them would ever have found the words for. She had not known before that afternoon that there were kinds of strength that had nothing to do with a wand. She was 40 years old and learning it from a man who mended teeth for a living, and she found she was not too proud to learn it, which was itself a thing the old Bellatrix could never have said. Bellatrix watched him gather these people to himself as he gathered anything bright, and she did not stop it, though every one of them was a thread that could be pulled, a way the world might one day find its way up her rock. She had built her whole strategy on isolation, and here was her heir undoing it, a warm relation at a time, and she found she could not make herself close the doors he opened. He needed them. A child raised by one dangerous woman on a rock would grow up crooked. She knew that much about the raising of things. He needed the pig's snout and the piggyback and the gentle man, and if letting him have them cost her some of her cover, then it was a cost like the sleepless nights that she had not counted and paid anyway. She began the lessons the winter Harry turned 5, and they were not the lessons Narcissa's black books held, not yet. They were smaller and stranger, and they were the ones that mattered. She taught him to keep a room in his head. She did it as a game, because he was 5 and a game was the only door into him. There is a house inside you, she told him, older than this one, with as many rooms as you like, and you are the only one with a key. And if you learn to walk its passages, you can put anything you want behind any door, and no one, not the cleverest wizard alive, can open it without your leave. He liked the game. He was good at it, better than she had expected, because he had a tidy mind under the warmth, a mind that liked to know where things were kept. She would sit across from him at the kitchen table and reach gently into the front of his thoughts, and he would learn to feel her coming and shut the door, giggling, delighted with himself, and she would let him win far more often than she took the room, because the point was not to defeat him. The point was to build brick by brick in a laughing child the one defense that might one day keep the Dark Lord out of his head. She did not tell him that was the point. She told him it was a game, and it was a game, and it was also the most important thing she ever taught him, and both of those were true at once, which was how she had decided to raise him, telling the truth in the size he could carry and letting the rest grow up around him like the wards on the rock. Narcissa managed twice in those years to bring Draco to the valley. It cost her a great deal to do it, a whole architecture of lies to Lucius about where she and the child had spent an afternoon, and she did it anyway because she had watched her own son grow up in a house full of men who talked about blood the way butchers talk about meat, and she wanted him once or twice to stand in a room where blood meant something warmer. The 2 boys were nearly of an age. They circled each other the first time the way small boys do, Wary and Draco, who at 5 had already learned from his father to look for the value in a thing before he decided how to treat it, looked at Harry's plain clothes and Cobb's plain house and visibly began to arrange his small face into contempt. Harry took the contempt off him inside an hour, and he did it without noticing he was doing it, which was the thing about Harry that Bellatrix never stopped marveling at. He simply showed Draco the climbable tree, and the place on the rock where you could see 3 counties, and the cellar with the false wall, sharing his whole world without once asking what Draco was worth. And Draco, who had never in his short life been given a thing without a price attached to it, did not know what to do with generosity, and so in the end surrendered to it. When Narcissa came to take him home, he did not want to go. He had come as a small lord inspecting his lessers, and he left as a boy who had a cousin, and on the second visit, a year later, he arrived running. Bellatrix watched all of this from the doorway, and she said to her sister, low, so the boys would not hear, "You are teaching him something dangerous, bringing him here." "I am teaching him there is a place where he is loved and not weighed," Narcissa said. "It is the most dangerous thing I have ever done to him, and I would do it 100 times. Let him have one room in his childhood where the door is not a transaction. He can spend the rest of his life the way Lucius wants. He may as well know once what he is spending." They stood together in the doorway, the 2 sisters who had helped burn the third, and watched their sons climb the one tree on the rock, and neither of them said what they were both thinking, which was that they had begun quietly, without ever declaring it, to raise the next generation of the House of Black to be something the last one had not been. The tapestry with its waiting space hung on the wall behind them. There was room on it still for a great many names. The world found the rock once in those years, and it was not the Order and it was not the Ministry. It was one of her own. She never learned which of them it was. A Death Eater who had gone to ground after the fall, as she had, and who had spent the quiet years the way such men do, nursing the memory of the mark and hating the ones who had walked away from it. Bellatrix had walked away more completely than any of them and taken the prize with her, and there were men who could not forgive that, who had decided in the long gray years that the way back into their lord's favor when he returned would be to bring him the head of the traitor and the body of the child she had stolen from his triumph. The man was clever enough to find the valley and not clever enough to find the house, which was the only reason Harry lived to be 6. Bellatrix felt the outer ward go at dusk on an autumn evening, the deep one, the one that only broke to real force, and she knew before she reached the window that this was not Narcissa's careful touch or Rodolphus's remembered flavor. This was a wand cast to kill. She put Harry in the cellar. She did it the way they had drilled it, because she had drilled it, because she was not a woman who trusted the world to be kind, and so she had taught a 5-year-old what to do when the deep ward broke. Go to Cobb, go to the cellar, into the space behind the false wall her own wards would seal, and be silent and wait, and do not come out for anyone, until she came for him herself and said the word only the 2 of them knew. Harry went. He was frightened, she could see he was frightened, but he went because he had practiced going, and at the mouth of the cellar stairs he stopped and looked back at her the way he had looked at her from the doorway 2 years before and said, "Come back." "I always do," she said. "Down now, say the word to Cobb." Then she turned to meet the man on her rock, and she stopped being anyone's mother and became, for the length of it, the thing the Death Eaters had once been afraid to be in a room with. He was good. He had been good enough to survive the fall and clever enough to find the valley, and he came up the rock behind a wall of curses that would have ended a lesser witch in the first exchange. Bellatrix met him on the narrow path where the rock gave her the ground and gave him nothing, and she did not duel him as she had dueled oars for sport to see them break. She had no sport in her that night. She had a child in a cellar and a man on her path who meant to reach him, and she took the man apart with an economy that would have disappointed the woman she used to be. No flourishes, no laughter, only the fastest cruel geometry of ending a threat, because every second she spent on show was a second the man existed within reach of the cellar, and she would not spend one. It was over in under a minute. She stood on the path in the last of the light over what was left of him, and she was breathing hard, and she was not shaking, and she noted the not shaking with a kind of grim interest, because the old work had used to leave her exalted and trembling, and this had left her only certain. She had crossed some line without noticing the crossing. She did not kill for the pleasure of it any longer. She killed to keep a door shut. It was the same act, and it was not the same act at all, and she stood on her rock in the dark and understood that she had changed in the one place she had thought was past changing, and she went to burn the body before she went to the cellar, so that the child would not have to see what keeping him cost. She said the word at the false wall, and it opened, and Harry came out of the dark and into her, all at once, arms and legs, and she caught him and held him, and he did not ask what the noise had been or where the man was or why she smelled of scorched things. He only held on, and after a while, muffled against her, he said the thing he always said, the thing that had become the truest sentence in his small vocabulary. "You came back." "I always come back," Bellatrix said into his hair. "There is nothing in this world or the next that keeps me from coming back to you. Do you understand me, Harry? Not the Ministry, not the whole Order of Merlin, not death itself when it comes for me, and it will keep me from coming back through that door for you. I have made it the one law I cannot break. Do you understand?" He did not entirely. He was 6. But he understood the shape of it, the way children understand the shape of a promise before they understand its words, and he kept it, that shape, folded up small inside him where the important things go, and it was there years later when he needed it, when the door he had to come back through was a great deal darker than a cellar. The tapestry hung in the main room of the Eyrie through all of it, the small cadet copy with its new gold name, and Bellatrix looked at it most nights before she slept. Below Harry's name the space still waited, the width of another name. 5 years now the old magic had held that space open, patient in the way only very old magic can be, and Bellatrix had come to think of it the way you come to think of an empty chair at a table, a thing you have stopped expecting to be filled and would no longer quite know how to set for. Harry asked about it once when he was old enough to read the names. He stood in front of the tapestry sounding out the dead, his finger moving under the gold, and he found his own name at the bottom and the space below it, and he turned to her with the frown he got when a thing did not add up, which was a frown she had already learned to be wary of because it usually meant he had noticed something she had hoped he would not. "There's a space," he said. "After me." "Why is there a space? The house is not finished," Bellatrix said. She had never lied to him and did not begin then. A tree with one branch falls in the first storm. The magic wants two. It is holding the place for the other. The other what? The other air. She looked at the waiting gold, the loose thread that had never worked itself into letters. "You are the first. Somewhere there is a second. I have not found them yet. Perhaps I never will, and the space will wait 100 years as it waited 100 years for you." Harry considered this with the seriousness he brought to things that mattered. "When you find them," he said, "will they live here with us, if they will have us?" "Good," Harry said, and turned back to the tapestry, satisfied in the way of a child who has been told the family will get larger and has decided this is good news, which is not a thing all children decide, and which told her something about the one she was raising. "I don't want to be the only one at the bottom. It's lonely at the bottom on your own." She looked at the small, dark head in front of the wall of her ancestors, and at the empty space he had already, without knowing it, promised to fill with someone. And she did not tell him how right he was, that it was lonely at the bottom on your own, that she had been the only one at the bottom of her own wall her whole life, and had filled the loneliness with a lord, and it had nearly cost her everything. She did not tell him. She put her hand on his head instead, which was a language they both understood, and they stood together in front of the tapestry while the light went, two names at the bottom of an old tree, and a space waiting under them for a third. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The second name they found her in a bookshop, which Bellatrix would say for years afterward was the only place in England they could have found her, given who she turned out to be. Harry was 7 and had begun to chafe at the rock the way any healthy thing chafes at a cage, no matter how kind. He had read every book in the Eyrie twice and Cobb's patience thin, and Bellatrix had judged, weighing the risk as she weighed everything, that a boy who never saw the world would grow up frightened of it, and a frightened heir was no use to anyone, so she took him out, carefully. Under a glamour that softened her own too famous face into someone forgettable, into a Muggle town 2 counties from the valley, on a wet Tuesday in October when the shops were empty, and she let him walk down an ordinary street holding her hand and look in ordinary windows, and she watched every roofline and doorway the whole time with the part of her that never rested. The bookshop was his idea. He saw it and pulled toward it as he pulled toward anything with pages, and she let him, because a bookshop had corners a duelist liked, one door, high shelves, sightlines she could hold. She stood near the front with her back to a wall and let him wander into the stacks, and that was where he met the girl. She was up a rolling ladder in the children's section, higher than a child her size had any business being, reaching for a book on a shelf she could not properly reach, and she was talking to herself, a low-running commentary of the sort produced by children who have learned that if they want an intelligent conversation, they must generally supply both halves of it. Harry stopped at the foot of the ladder and looked up at her. She had a great deal of brown hair that had defeated whatever had been done to tame it that morning, and she was frowning at the book above her fingers, and she said, without looking down, in the tone of a person who has decided a stranger's presence must be dealt with efficiently, "If you've come to tell me to get down, I'm not going to, so you needn't bother." "I wasn't going to," Harry said. "Which one do you want? I'll get the ladder." She looked down at him then. Whatever she had expected, it was not that. "It's the blue one," she said after a moment's recalculation. "The children's history of everything interesting. It's the 3rd volume. They shelved it wrong. It's meant to be with 1 and 2, but somebody put it up here with the atlases, which is exactly the sort of thing that happens when people don't respect systems." Harry pushed the ladder 6 inches along its rail so the blue book came within her reach, and she took it and came down and stood in front of him holding it against her chest and examining him with the frank thoroughness of a child who has not yet learned that you are supposed to pretend not to study people. "You're not from here," she said. "I know everyone from here, and you talk oddly old-fashioned, like the books." "I'm from a long way off," Harry said, which was true. "I'm Hermione," she said, as though correcting an oversight. "Hermione Granger, it's from Shakespeare. Most people can't say it. You can practice if you like." "Harry," said Harry, and did not give a surname because he had 2 and neither was safe, and he had been taught that carefully, and he minded it for the first time standing in front of a girl who had given her whole name freely and was looking at him waiting for his. They talked for 40 minutes. Bellatrix from the front of the shop watched her heir fall into conversation with a Muggle child the way water falls into a low place, easily, completely, and she was on the point of ending it, of gathering him up in a way, when she felt the thing that changed the whole shape of her life for the second time. The girl did magic. She did not mean to. Harry had reached for the blue book to look at a page she was describing, and their hands had knocked it, and it had fallen, and Hermione had said, "Oh, no," in the particular tone of a tidy child watching a thing go wrong, and the book had stopped falling, 6 inches above the floor. It hung there, a heartbeat, righted itself, and settled onto the boards face up and open to the very page she had wanted, and Hermione looked at it and went white and glanced around to see who had noticed, and did the thing that told Bellatrix everything. She was not surprised that it had happened. She was only frightened of being seen. This had happened before. It happened to her often. She had learned to be afraid of it, this brilliant Muggle child, learned that the strange things she could do made the other children step back from her, and the grown-ups exchanged looks over her head, and she had no idea in the world what it was and no one to tell her, and she gathered up her book and got ready to flee before the adults came. And the power in it, that was what held Bellatrix at the front of the shop. She had felt Harry's power, the once-in-a-generation strength of it, and had thought it the largest she would ever stand near in a child. This was of a kind, different in flavor, cooler, more ordered, but of a kind. A book caught and righted and turned to the correct page by a frightened girl who had not lifted a finger. That was not the loose, flailing magic of an ordinary young witch. That was control, native, untaught, the mark of a bloodline that had bred for it once and forgotten it had. Bellatrix looked at the Muggle child with the brown hair standing in a Muggle bookshop, and the tapestry in her mind's eye stirred the way it had stirred the night she named Harry, and the space beneath his name, the space that had waited 7 years, seemed all at once to lean toward the front of the shop. She did not act on it. She was not a fool. But she memorized the girl's face and her name, and she gathered up her air and took him out into the rain before either child could give the other anything that could be traced, and Harry looked back over his shoulder the whole way to the door. "Her name is Hermione Granger," Harry said that night for the 4th time in the tone of a boy laying evidence before a tribunal. "She's read more than me. She knew about the War of the Roses and the parts of a flower, and she said her parents fixed teeth, which I don't think can be true. Nobody fixes teeth, and she wasn't scared of me at all. Can she come here?" "No," said Bellatrix, who was reading and had said no 3 times already and was interested to see how many more it would take. "Why not?" "Because I do not know her, and I do not bring people I do not know onto my rock, and neither will you when it is your rock, if you have any sense, which tonight I doubt." She turned a page. "Eat your supper." Harry ate his supper with the air of a boy filing an appeal. "You liked her," he said. "I saw you watching. You had the face. I have no face." "You do. You have the face you get when you're working something out. You had it in the shop." He was 7, and he read her better than anyone alive, which was inconvenient, and which she had brought on herself by raising him in a house with only one other person's face to read. "You're going to find out about her, I can tell. You've already decided." Bellatrix put the book down and looked at him across the table at the disconcerting accuracy of him, and decided, as she often did, that lying to him was more trouble than it was worth. "Yes," she said, "I am going to find out about her. Not because you have asked, so wipe that off your face. Because she did a thing in that shop that a Muggle child cannot do, and she did it well, and there is a story under that, and I want the story before I decide what it means. You will not speak of her to your aunt or your cousin or anyone until I have it. Do you understand?" "She's a witch," Harry said, and it was not a question, and his whole face had opened on the word. "She doesn't know, does she? That's why she was scared. Nobody's told her." He looked at Bellatrix with an expression she had learned to be wary of, because it was the expression that came before he committed to a thing entirely, which he did rarely and completely. "That's awful, being able to do things and having everyone frightened of you and nobody explaining. That's the worst thing I can think of." Bellatrix looked at her heir, who had been raised by a woman the whole world was frightened of, and who had never once been left to wonder what he was, and she understood that he was not talking only about the girl. "Yes," she said, more gently than she had meant to. "It is a bad way to grow up. Now eat." It took Bellatrix 3 weeks to find the story, and when she found it, it was better than she had let herself hope. She did it the way she did all careful things, quietly, through Narcissa's library and the old black genealogies, and a single guarded visit to a records vault beneath Gringotts that a black heir's key could open and a ministry writ could not. Grangers, an ordinary Muggle name, dentists in the home counties, a mother and father and 1 clever daughter, nothing in the Muggle records to explain a caught book. But wizarding genealogy did not follow the Muggle name, and Bellatrix knew where to look, because the girl's power had had a flavor to it, cool and precise and orderly, and there was one old family whose magic had run exactly that way, and whose line the standard trees called extinct. Dagworth Granger. Hector Dagworth Granger had founded the most extraordinary society of potioneers 3 centuries gone, and his line had been old even then, a family famous for a particular cast of mind, brilliant and exacting and cold, that bred true down the generations the way a nose or a temper breeds true. The line had thinned as the old lines did. And 4 generations back, a daughter of the house had been born a squib, without magic, an embarrassment in a family that valued nothing above the gift, and she had been quietly married off into the Muggle world and struck from the family's memory, and the family had shortened its double name to a single, and forgotten, in the way the old families were expert at forgetting, that they had ever cast a daughter out at all. The squib had carried the blood without the gift. And the blood had waited, folded up small and silent through 4 Muggle generations, dentists and clerks and a schoolteacher, none of them anything, until it surfaced all at once in a girl with a great deal of brown hair and a cool, exacting, brilliant mind who could catch a falling book and turn it to the right page and did not know why. Granger was not a Muggle name at all. It was the tail end of Dagworth Granger, worn down by 4 generations of hiding, and the girl in the bookshop was the last living branch of a wizarding house older than the Malfoys, come back the way Harry had come back, out of a root everyone had thought long dead. Bellatrix sat in the vault beneath Gringotts with the parchment in her hands, and she laughed once low in the dark at the shape of it. The tapestry had left a space beneath Harry's name for 7 years. It had wanted a second heir, a redundancy, a name to make the first secure. And she had spent 7 years assuming the second name, when it came, would be another black by some cadet line, another scion of her own withering house. Instead, the old magic had reached out past her, past the whole burning tree of the blacks, and found the last daughter of another dying line entirely, and had leaned toward her across a bookshop floor, because the House of Black, to survive, did not need more of its own thinning. It needed new, it needed the thing Bellatrix had spent her whole life being taught to burn. She thought of Andromeda's spare room, the Muggle-born husband and the half-Muggle daughter and the pot her child all under one roof, and Andromeda's voice, "Look at this room and tell me what's pure in it." She thought of the word she had killed for. And she folded the parchment and put it inside her robe and climbed up out of the dark, having decided, with the completeness she brought to the few things she committed to entirely, that she was going to claim the Dagworth Granger girl for the House of Black, and that the claiming was going to save the girl's life, because there was one more thing the parchment had told her, and it was not good. She was not the only one who had felt the girl's power. The Death Eaters who had gone to ground after the fall had spent the quiet years, as she had feared, hoarding grievance, and some of them had spent it hunting, in the patient way of men with nothing left to believe in but the return of the thing that had given their lives shape. They watched for young power. It was a thing their lord would want when he came back, a census of the strong children being born while he was away, the ones worth turning and the ones worth ending. A Muggle-born child of extraordinary strength was exactly the kind of thing that went into their ledgers, and Bellatrix, working her way carefully through what Narcissa could learn of the old network's whispers, found the girl's name already in them. Not by the name Dagworth Granger, they had not troubled to look that deep. By the name Granger, a mudblood, unusually strong home county's flag, to be watched, to be dealt with in due course. Due course. She knew what due course meant in a Death Eater's ledger. It meant a night in a quiet house and a family of Muggle dentists who would never understand what had come through their door, why, and a clever, frightened girl who did not even know what she was, ended before she could become it. They would not hurry. There was no one to hurry for with the mark asleep, but they would come in their own time, because a strong mudblood left alive was an untidiness, and the men who had served the Dark Lord could not bear an untidiness. Bellatrix read the girl's name in the ledger of her own old comrades, and something went through her that she had no wish to examine, and she made her plans, and she went to the Grangers. She did not go the way she had gone to the bookshop, softened and glamoured. She went as herself, because what she had to say required them to believe her, and she had learned, raising Harry, that being believed sometimes cost more than being liked. She chose the afternoon and the front door, and she made Harry stay in the car Ted had taught her, badly, to drive, because a 7-year-old in the window did more to make frightened people open a door than any amount of reasoning. She was right about that. Mrs. Granger came to the door with her guard up, a neat, capable woman with her daughter's jaw, and saw a strange, severe woman on her step and a boy waiting anxiously in a parked car, and something in the arrangement made her hesitate on the threshold instead of closing it. "A name will mean nothing to you," Bellatrix said, "and everything I am about to tell you will sound like madness, and I am going to ask you for 10 minutes anyway, because your daughter's life depends on the next hour, and I am the only person in England who both knows it and cares." She did not smile. She had found that people trusted her least when she smiled. Your Hermione can do things she cannot explain, things that frighten her and frighten the children around her, books that catch themselves. Things that mend or move or break when she is upset. You have seen it. You have told yourselves stories about coincidence because the truth had no shelf to sit on. May I come in and give the truth a shelf? Mrs. Granger's face did the thing that faces do when a stranger names the private fear you have never said aloud. She looked back at the car, at the anxious child in it, and then she stepped back from her own door and let the strange woman into her house. And it was the bravest thing Bellatrix saw a Muggle do in all the years she knew them, braver than Ted in the frozen garden, because Ted had known what he was afraid of, and this woman was letting an unknown terror over her own threshold on the strength of a sentence about her child. It took the whole afternoon and into the evening, and it was the hardest thing Bellatrix had done that did not involve a wand. She told them, all of it in the size they could carry, which was Harry's phrase now in her head, the truth in the size the listener could hold. She told them there was a hidden world, and that their daughter belonged to it by blood they had never known they carried, an old family, cast out 4 generations back for the crime of a child born without magic, the blood surfacing now in Hermione whole and strong. She showed them because words were not enough for people who fixed teeth for a living and believed in what they could see. And she did small magic in their sitting room, warmed their cold tea with a gesture, mended a chip in a saucer, lit the lamps with a look, and watched the 2 rational people watch the floor drop out of everything they had believed about the shape of the world, and hold somehow to the edge of it for the sake of the child asleep upstairs. And then she told them the rest because she would not buy their trust with half a truth. She told them their daughter's name was in a ledger. She told them what kind of men kept the ledger, and what due course meant, and that it was not a question of whether but of when, and that no lock they owned and no Muggle protection they could summon would matter in the least on the night it came. She watched the fear come up in the mother's face and the father's, the specific animal fear of parents who have just learned there is a wolf and no wall, and she did not soften it because they needed it, because the fear was the only thing that would make them do the impossible thing she had come to ask. You cannot protect her, Bellatrix said into the silence after. I say it without unkindness. You are good and you are brave, I have seen it this afternoon, and it will not be enough, because the thing that is coming does not care how good you are. I can protect her. It is the one thing in the world I am certain I can do, because I have been doing it for another child for 7 years against the same men, and they have not touched him, and they will not touch her. She laid it out then, the whole of it, as she laid out a duel in her head before she fought it. I am not here to take your daughter from you. I want you to hear that because you are already imagining it, and it is not what I am. I am here to offer her a shield and a name and the teaching that will keep her power from turning on her, and I am here to offer it to you as well, because the moment she is claimed the ledger touches you too, and I will not save the branch and leave the root to be cut. She told them what she proposed. That Hermione would come to the valley, to the house on the rock, to learn what she was among people who could teach her, and behind wards nothing had ever breached. That she would be raised as the second heir of an old house, with everything that meant. That the Grangers would not lose her, that they would be brought under the same protection, moved somewhere the ledger could not find, their old life closed cleanly so no thread led to their daughter, and that they would see her, that Bellatrix swore it on the one thing she held sacred, which was the keeping of a child. I will not make of you what my family made of the woman who married out, she said, and did not explain it, and did not need to. I have watched what that costs. Your daughter will know her mother's face her whole life. That is not the bargain. The bargain is only this: let me stand between her and the men who have written her name down. I am very good at standing between things. It is, as it happens, the only good thing I am. She did not go home while the Grangers deliberated. She could not have said, if asked, why not. She told herself it was thoroughness, the same instinct that made her renew wards a day before they needed it. She left Harry with Cobb, and she took a room she did not sleep in near the Grangers' street, and for 3 nights she watched the ordinary house with the ordinary family in it from the ordinary dark, and on the 3rd night the watching paid for itself. He came a little after 2, on foot, in Muggle clothes worn by a man who did not understand how Muggle clothes were meant to sit, and he was not there to knock. Bellatrix knew the walk of a man casing a house. She had cased enough of them. She watched him drift past the Granger front garden once, slow, reading the windows, and drift back and pause at the low gate with his hand going to a pocket that no gardener kept a wand in, and she was across the road and behind him before his hand closed on it. She did not kill him. That was the discipline she had learned on her own rock, and she kept it here, in a Muggle street where a body would have been a thread the ministry could pull. She took his wand out of his hand from behind before he knew she was in the county, and she put her own against the base of his skull, and she said, in the voice that had once made grown Death Eaters study the floor, "You are looking at a house that is mine now. You did not know that, you know it now." He tried to turn, and she did not let him. "You will go back to whoever keeps the ledger, and you will strike this name out of it." The Granger name, all 3 of them, struck out, gone, a dead end, nothing here worth the walk. And when they ask you why, you will not be able to say, because you will not remember this street or this night or your own reason for coming to it. You will only remember that the Granger name is not worth the walk. Do you understand me? Nod. Good. She was very fast and very thorough, and the man walked away up the dark street a quarter of an hour later with a clean hole in his memory where the whole errand had been, and a certainty planted in its place that the Granger house was a waste of a good night, and he never came back, and neither did anyone the ledger sent, because a scout who returns saying a target is worthless is believed, being one of their own. Bellatrix stood in the Muggle dark outside the sleeping family's house and turned the stranger's wand over in her fingers, and understood that she had just done, for a family of dentists she had known for one afternoon, the exact thing she had done for Harry on her rock for 7 years, and had not hesitated and had not needed to be asked. The circle of what she would stand between and the world had widened again without her deciding it. She was beginning to suspect it would keep widening for the rest of her life and that she had stopped somewhere minding. She never told the Grangers about the man. It was not a thing they needed to carry. But she looked at Mrs. Granger differently when next they met, the brave woman who had let an unknown terror over her threshold for her child's sake and never known how near the known terror had come the same week. And something in Bellatrix's regard must have shown, because Mrs. Granger paused and looked at her and said, "You've done something for us, haven't you? I won't ask what." And Bellatrix said, "No. Don't," and that was the whole of it, and it was, in its way, the moment the two mothers decided to trust each other, in the manner of women who have both learned that the deepest things are the ones you agree not to say. They said yes. Not that night. They were not fools, and Bellatrix respected them the more for the days they made her wait. But they said yes in the end because Bellatrix took them, under glamour and heavy protection, to a place where they could watch the truth of the hidden world with their own eyes from a safe distance. And because Mrs. Granger, clever like her daughter, went away and thought and could find no hole in the arithmetic that Bellatrix had not already found and closed, and because in the end the thing that decided them was not the fear at all. It was Hermione. They had told her, carefully, some of it. That she was special in a way that had a name, that there were people like her and a school of them, and a place she could go to learn what she was. And the girl who had spent her whole short life being the strange child the others stepped away from, the too clever girl talking to herself up a ladder because there was no one to talk to, had listened to her parents explain that she was not broken, that the things she could do were not wrong, that there was a whole world where a girl like her was not strange but ordinary, was not feared but taught, and she had asked one question, and the question had decided everything. Is that boy going to be there? The one from the shop, Harry. He's already there, her mother said. He lives there, he's like you. And Hermione Granger, 8 years old and brilliant and lonely to a degree her parents had never fully seen, said, "Then I want to go," and that was that, and Bellatrix, when it was reported to her, understood that the tapestry had not been the only thing leaning across the bookshop floor. Hermione came to the valley on a bright cold morning 3 weeks later, and by nightfall she had reorganized the library. She arrived clutching a single Muggle suitcase and a list. The list was 4 pages long in a careful round hand, and it contained every question she had thought of since her parents told her the truth, numbered and cross-referenced, and she presented it to Bellatrix on the threshold before she had so much as taken off her coat, with the air of a small ambassador delivering terms. Bellatrix took the list and read the first page and understood, standing on her own step in the cold, exactly what she had brought onto her rock. The girl wanted to know how magic was measured, whether it obeyed rules that could be written down, why some spells needed words and some did not, whether the wards on the house could be described mathematically, and if not, why not, and whether anyone had ever tried. It was, Bellatrix thought, the reading list of a person who intended to take the hidden world apart to see how it worked and then put it back together better, and she found to her surprise that she wanted to be there when the girl did it. Harry met her at the door and took her suitcase before she could argue about it, and showed her the house, all of it, the way he had shown Draco, holding nothing back. He showed her the climbable tree and the place on the rock where you could see 3 counties and the cellar with the false wall, and Hermione examined each of them with the same frank thoroughness she had turned on Harry in the bookshop, and asked questions he could not answer, and he did not mind not being able to answer them, which she noticed, because in her experience boys minded that very much. By the middle of the afternoon they had stopped being strangers and become something with no name yet, 2 clever, lonely children discovering, hour by hour, that the loneliness had been a solvable problem all along, and the solution had simply been the other one of them. Cobb took to her at once, which surprised Bellatrix because Cobb took to almost nothing. The old elf watched the girl walk into his kitchen, note the disorder of his herb shelf, and rearrange it without being asked into an order that was, Bellatrix had to admit, better, and instead of taking offense the elf bowed his cracked ears and said the herbs had wanted seeing to for a century and no one had had the eye. The daughter of the house, Cobb said that night, unprompted, setting the honey pot at Bellatrix's elbow. Cobb did not think to see 2 children of the house in one lifetime. Cobb is very old. Cobb will stay older now to see what they become. It was the nearest the elf ever came to joy, and Bellatrix marked it. She found the 2 of them at dusk in the library, which Hermione had spent the day setting to rights. The girl had pulled every book off the shelves and sorted them on the floor in a system Bellatrix could not immediately read and then could, all at once, and it was a good system, better than the family's own, arranged not by age or by author, but by what a person would want when they came looking. Harry sat in the middle of the drift of books reading one about defensive magic, and Hermione sat cross-legged beside him with the black-bound Black family volumes open in her lap, the deep arts, the ones Bellatrix had not yet given either of them, and she was reading them with a frown of pure absorption, and Bellatrix opened her mouth to say those were not for her yet and then closed it, because the girl was not merely reading them. She was understanding them. 8 years old and a week into the wizarding world, and she was following the old black magic down into its roots, and beside her Harry looked up from his own book to watch her do it with an expression on his face that Bellatrix recognized, because she had worn it herself once, looking at the two names on the wall. He was looking at her the way you look at a thing you have decided to keep. Bellatrix stood in the doorway of her own library and did not interrupt them. She had built her life on the principle that anything she loved could be taken, and so was best kept few and kept hidden. And here were two of them in one room, her heir and the girl who was about to become her heir, reading her family's secrets on the floor by lamplight, entirely unguarded, entirely unafraid. And she understood that her whole strategy of the heart had just been overturned by an 8-year-old with a suitcase and a list, and that she was, against every instinct she owned, glad of it. The naming was done in the main room of the Eyrie in front of the small tapestry on the night of the new moon, because the old rites wanted a dark sky. It was not a Muggle adoption with its papers and its stamps. It was older than papers. Bellatrix had read it out of Narcissa's black books, the blood right of the House of Black, by which a house could take into itself a child not born to it, and make the taking true in the deep places where such things were counted. She had not performed it before. No one living had. It had not been needed for 100 years, because the old families did not take in new blood, they only spent the blood they had. She read it 3 times to be sure of it, and she gathered what it wanted: a silver bowl, a drop of the child's blood, and a drop of the heir's, water from the threshold stone, and she brought the 2 children to stand before the wall of the dead. Harry stood on the left, 7 years old, in his good robes, watching the girl he had met in a bookshop become his sister with an expression of naked delight he had not learned to hide and would not have hidden if he could. Hermione stood on the right, 8 years old, in robes that were new and strange to her, her hair for once contained, holding herself very straight, because holding herself straight was what she did when she was frightened, and she was frightened, and she was also underneath luminous, because she had spent her whole life being told in 100 small ways that she did not belong anywhere, and she was about to be told in the oldest magic in the house that she belonged here. "You do not have to do this," Bellatrix told her, because she would not take even a Dagworth Granger without her yes. "The wards protect you either way, the teaching is yours either way. This is not the price of your safety. This is a different thing. This makes you mine and his and the house's in your blood forever, in a way that cannot be undone by any power I know. You are 8, that is very young to choose a forever. If you want to wait until you are older to choose it, the space on the wall has waited 100 years and can wait a few more. No one in this room will think less of you, I promise you that." Hermione looked at the tapestry, at the space beneath Harry's name that had waited so long, and at Harry beside her, who was holding his breath, and at the severe, frightening woman who had just, in the middle of the most important night of her life, given her permission to say no. She was 8, and she was the cleverest person in the room by a margin that would only grow, and she had already worked out something it had taken Bellatrix 40 years to learn, which was that the people who give you the honest chance to refuse are the people it is safe to say yes to. "I want to be at the bottom of the wall with Harry," she said. "He told me in the shop before you took him away. He said it was lonely being the only one at the bottom on your own." She lifted her chin. "I've been the only one at the bottom my whole life. I'd like to not be, so yes, I choose it. Do the right." Bellatrix did the right. She spoke the old words over the silver bowl and mingled the drops, the heir's blood in the daughter's and the water from the stone, and she painted the mark on the girl's brow with 2 fingers the way the book required, and she named her into the house. "Hermione of the House of Black," the tapestry answered. The loose gold thread that had hung unworked beneath Harry's name for 100 years, and beneath the space for 7, began to move, climbing, finding the place, and it stitched itself into letters, gold on black, a new name into an old tree for the 2nd time in a century. And as it wrote, something ran through the room that raised the hair on all their arms, the old magic recognizing its own, the House of Black taking a stranger into its blood and finding. To the surprise of no one in that room, but to the astonishment of every dead name on the wall, that the stranger fit. The letters finished. 2 names stood at the bottom of the tree now, side by side, no space between them and no space below, because the magic that had waited 100 years for the redundancy it needed had got it at last, and was, in whatever way old magic could be, content. Harry let out the breath he had been holding. He reached across the small space between them and took Hermione's hand, the way children do, without weighing it, and Hermione, who had spent her life keeping her hands to herself because the other children flinched, let him and did not flinch, and the 2 of them stood in front of the wall of the House of Black holding hands, the last daughter of one dying line and the last son of another, made kin by a right older than either family's fall. Bellatrix stood behind them in the dark with the silver bowl in her hands and looked at the 2 names glowing on the tapestry, and at the 2 children below it, and she did not have a name for what she felt, so she did not try to give it one. She only stood and guarded the door, which was the thing she was for. "Taudra's purr," Hermione read off the top of the tapestry, sounding it out, frowning at it in the way that Bellatrix would come to know meant a question was coming that no one would enjoy answering. "That's Latin, sort of. It means always pure, but I'm not, am I, pure? That's the whole point of me. I'm the opposite of what that word wants." You are the truest thing on that wall, Bellatrix said and set down the bowl. Everything above your name spent a family to stay pure and had nothing left. You and he are what pure was always supposed to mean and never did. The House of Black kept its blood and died of it. It is going to keep you two instead and live. She looked at the motto she had killed for and at the girl who had just made a lie of it and a truth of it in the same night. We will want a new one in time. The old words have earned their rest, but not tonight. Tonight you are both simply at the bottom of the wall, and neither of you is there alone, and that is enough of a change for one dark moon. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. The training years. Bellatrix trained them the way she did everything, which was to say completely, and it took her the better part of a year to learn that completely was not the same as cruelly, and that the difference was the whole of it. She began with the wand because a witch who could not defend herself was a witch waiting to be spent, and she had watched too many be spent. She taught them to duel on the flat shelf of rock above the house in all weathers, because a duel did not wait for fine mornings. She taught Harry first because he was hers longest, and she taught him wrong at the start. She taught him as she herself had been taught, which was by being beaten until fear made her fast. And it worked in that Harry became fast, and it did not work. In that one gray afternoon she pressed him too hard, drove him back across the rock with a discipline that had no give in it, and knocked his wand from his hand and put her own to his throat before she understood that he had gone white and still under it, that some corner of him had gone somewhere she recognized. The place a child goes when the person who is supposed to be safe becomes the danger. She lowered the wand at once. She had raised him 9 years and never once made him look at her like that, and the look landed in her worse than any curse. Enough, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she was. That is enough for today. Hermione had watched the whole of it from the edge of the rock where she waited her turn, and Hermione, who was 10 now and afraid of very little that could be reasoned with, walked out onto the dueling ground between them without being asked and picked up Harry's wand from the stone and put it back in his hand and turned to face Bellatrix, chin up, unafraid. You're teaching him to be frightened, she said. It was not an accusation. It was the flat delivery of a fact she had observed and analyzed and found wanting. He learns faster when he isn't, I've watched. When you're patient with him, he's better in half the time. The fear's making him slower, not faster. Your method is inefficient. No one had called Bellatrix Lestrange inefficient in her life, and certainly no one had lived comfortably afterward, and she stood on the rock and looked at the 10-year-old who had just done it, and at Harry standing pale beside her holding the wand she had put back in his hand, the two of them side by side facing her down, and something in her that had been clenched since her own childhood came loose. Explain, she said. Hermione explained. She had been keeping notes. It emerged on her own learning and Harry's, a small, careful ledger of what worked, and she laid it out with the pitiless clarity of a child who does not yet know which truths adults prefer unspoken. That Harry learned defensive magic fastest when he was defending something, that his power answered to protection the way a plant answers to light, that driving him with fear taught his hands to be quick and his heart to be somewhere else, and that if Bellatrix wanted the best of him, she should give him something to guard and then try to get past it and watch what he became. He took the door off its hinges without breaking it, Hermione said, because Harry had told her the story, because Harry told her everything. That's who he is. You keep trying to teach him to attack. He's not an attacker. He's a wall. Teach him to be a wall. Bellatrix looked at her heir and at the girl who understood him better after 2 years than she had understood him in 9, not because she loved him more, which was not possible, but because she loved him differently, sideways, with a mind that watched instead of a heart that only held. And she put away, that afternoon, the whole method she had been raised by, the beating and the fear, and she began again, and she taught Harry to be a wall. He was extraordinary at it. Give him something to stand in front of, and he became immovable, his shield charms deepening until they could turn curses that should have shattered them, his whole loose, warm power tightening to a single purpose, which was that nothing was getting past him to the thing behind. The thing behind was usually Hermione. That was how they trained in the end, the two of them together, Harry the wall and Hermione the mind, she flinging the problems and he standing between her and the consequences, and Bellatrix would send curse after curse across the rock and watch a 10-year-old boy hold a shield that a grown Auror would have envied, not because he was angry, but because his sister was behind it. What she noticed and did not comment on was what the two of them did after. The training left them wrung out, and on the bad evenings, when the rock had been cold and the curses hard, they did not go to separate rooms to lick their bruises the way Bellatrix had done at their age. They went to the library, and Harry would sit on the floor with his back against the shelves, and Hermione would sit beside him and read aloud from whatever she was taking apart that week, not because he followed the theory, which he did not, but because the sound of her working a problem was the sound that told him the day was over and the wall could come down. He mended her too, in his sideways way. When a spell would not yield to her and she went tight and quiet with the particular frustration of a mind that had never once failed to understand a thing, he He would simply put his shoulder against hers and wait, saying nothing, until the tightness went out of her and she could try again. Neither of them ever remarked on it. It was not a thing that needed remarking. It was only the shape their days had taken, the wall and the mind leaning on each other in the lamplight when the fighting was done, and Bellatrix, watching from the doorway she was always watching from, understood that she had trained them to guard the rock and they had, on their own, without a lesson, learned to guard each other. Hermione was a different kind of student, and Bellatrix had to learn her separately. Where Harry's magic answered to feeling, Hermione's answered to understanding. She would not cast a spell until she knew why it worked, which was maddening in a duel and invaluable everywhere else, and she took the black-bound Black family volumes that Bellatrix had guarded for a decade and read them the way other children read adventure stories, and then she began, gently at first and then not gently at all, to improve them. The old black arts were powerful, and they were also, Hermione pointed out, sloppy, 300 years of wizards passing down what worked without ever asking why, so that half the ritual was load-bearing and half was superstition, and no one had troubled to learn which half was which. Hermione troubled. She took the family's blood magic apart on the library floor over the course of a winter, testing each element, keeping her ledger, and she found the parts that mattered and the parts that were only ceremony, and she rebuilt the arts leaner and truer. And when she showed Bellatrix what she had done, Bellatrix stared at the parchment for a long time, because the girl had at 10 understood the magic of the House of Black more deeply than anyone who had been born to it in 2 centuries. How, Bellatrix said, it was not really a question. It was closer to the sound a person makes looking over an edge. It's just systems, Hermione said, not looking up from her notes. Everything is. People act as though magic is special and can't be understood, but it can. It just hasn't been because the people who could do it were too busy being proud of doing it to ask how. My mum fixes teeth. Teeth are systems too. You find out how the thing works and then you can make it work better. Nobody in your family ever wanted to make it work better. They only wanted to have it. She turned a page. That's why it was dying. Things die when nobody's improving them. Bellatrix sat down across from her, which she rarely did, and looked at the daughter of the Dagworth Grangers taking apart the magic that had defined her own family for 300 years, and understood that she had brought into the House of Black not merely a second heir but the first person in the line's long history who loved the magic enough to question it, and that the two things, Harry's power and Hermione's mind, were not 2 gifts but one, a wall and the will that told the wall where to stand. And that whatever the House of Black had been, what it was becoming under her hands on this rock was something the old dead names on the wall would not have recognized and could not have imagined, and had never once, in all their pure and withering centuries, been. She taught them the law of the old houses too, because a wand kept you alive and the law kept you standing, and she had watched too many powerful witches and wizards be stripped of everything they had by men who understood parchment better than they did. She drilled the 2 of them in heir law as she drilled them in dueling, the rights a black heir held and the ones he only thought he held, the vaults and seats and old debts, the difference between what a family owned and what a family could prove it owned. Hermione took to it as she took to everything with a structure, and within a year she had found 3 flaws in the family's own claims that a clever enemy could have used, and closed them. Harry hated it and learned it anyway because Bellatrix told him the truth, which was that the men who would one day come for them would not all come with wands, that some would come with writs and witnesses and a smile, and that a wall who could turn a curse and not a claim was only half a wall. He believed her. He had learned to believe her about the shape of danger because she had never once been wrong about it. The bad night came in the spring, and it came out of her, and it was the truest test the 3 of them ever faced before the last one. The mark had begun to stir. It had lain quiet on her arm for a decade, sleeping, and in the spring of the year Harry turned 11 it began, very faintly, to wake, not to burn. Itch deep, a pressure behind the black lines that had not been there since the fall, and Bellatrix knew what it meant, because she was one of perhaps 3 people alive who could read it, and what it meant was that somewhere in the world her old master had found enough of himself to begin the long climb back toward a body. He was not returned. He was far from returned. But he had turned over in his long sleep, and the turning ran up her arm like a cold current, and it dragged the old things up with it. She dreamed of him 3 nights running, worse each night, the low sure hum of his presence filling the spaces in her the way it used to. And on the 3rd night she woke with the killing word already in her mouth and the mark alight with a cold fire, and for a few gray seconds she did not know the room, did not know the rock, did not know the 2 children who slept down the passage were hers and not marks in a ledger, knew only the pull of the north that had owned her. And she was on her feet and out the door and halfway down the passage with her wand lit before the waking part of her caught up with the sleeping part and understood, with horror, where her feet were taking her. They were taking her to the children's rooms. She stopped in the passage. She made herself stop. She stood in the dark with the mark burning cold on her arm and her wand throwing hard light on the door behind which Harry slept. And she understood, more completely than she had understood anything in 10 years, that the thing she had been was not dead in her, that it had only been sleeping as the mark had slept, and that it had woken with him. and that it wanted, in the deep gray place below thought, to finish the errand it had left undone in a nursery a decade ago. She could not trust herself in the house. That was the plain arithmetic of it, and she did it fast, as she did all arithmetic that mattered. She turned from the door and made herself walk the other way out of the house, out onto the cold rock under the stars, as far from the sleeping children as her own wards would let her go. And she stood on the shelf of rock where she had taught them to duel, and she fought the worst duel of her life, which was against the part of herself that her old master had made, and there was no wand for it, and no shield, only her own will held against the current of the mark hour after hour in the dark. Refusing to go back in the house until the thing had passed, refusing to be the danger she had spent a decade standing between them and... They found her at dawn. Of course they did. She should have known they would. She had taught them to notice when a ward moved, and her going out had moved one, and Harry had woken to the wrongness and gone to her room and found it empty and done the thing he had done at 3. Come looking. Only he was 11 now, and he brought Hermione, because they did everything together now, and the two of them came out onto the cold rock at first light, and found her standing at the far edge of it with her back to the house, and the mark still faintly glowing through her sleeve. And she heard them come, and she said, without turning, in a voice scraped down to nothing, "Do not come closer." They came closer. I said, "Do not." She turned then, because they had to see it. They had to understand what she was telling them. She held up her arm and pushed back the sleeve and showed them the mark, a light, the thing she had never once let them see. "This is what I am. This is what made me. It woke 3 nights ago because he is waking far away and it wants me back, and last night it nearly had me, and I nearly came for you in your sleep with the old thing wearing my face. Do you understand what I am saying to you? I am not safe. I have never been safe. I have spent your whole lives being the danger that stood between you and worse dangers, and last night the line between me and the worst thing went thin, and I do not know that it will not go thin again. You should be afraid of me. Any creature with sense would be afraid of me. Be afraid of me. It is the correct thing to be." They looked at the burning mark on her arm, the two of them, 11 and 11, and they did not run, and they did not flinch, and Bellatrix stood on her rock in the dawn and waited for the thing she had dreaded for 10 years, the moment the children finally saw what she was and stepped back from it the way the world had always stepped back from her. Harry stepped forward instead. He crossed the rock and he took her burning arm in both his hands, the mark and all, the thing that had killed so many, and he held it as he had held her leg in the dark at 3, and he said, "You went outside." His voice shook and he went on anyway, which was the bravest thing she ever saw him do, and she saw him do a great many brave things. "It woke up and it wanted you to hurt us, and you went outside. You stood out here all night in the cold so you wouldn't. That's not the danger. The danger doesn't do that. The danger doesn't walk away from the thing it wants and stand on a rock all night fighting itself so 2 kids can sleep. You keep telling us what you're like. It's the mark. It's not the mark. It's the walking outside. That's what you are. You're the one who walks outside." And Hermione, who had been standing very still working it through in the pitiless way she had, said, "He's right, and there's something else." She looked at the mark with the frank analytical interest she turned on everything, unafraid, cataloging. "It woke because he's waking, which means we have a warning. Most people won't know he's coming back until he's back. You'll know months before because of that." She nodded at the arm as though it were a useful instrument rather than a horror. "We should study it, not hide it. If your arm is going to tell us when the most dangerous wizard alive is getting closer, then it's the best early warning ward in Britain, and we're wasting it by being frightened of it. May I take notes on it?" Bellatrix looked at the two of them, Harry holding her cursed arm and telling her what she was, and Hermione already asking to catalogue the worst thing in the house as calmly as weather, and the thing that had been clenched in her since a nursery a decade ago. The certainty that when they finally saw her they would leave broke apart and did not reform, and she got down on the cold rock because her legs would not hold her. The second time in her life a child had put her on the floor. And she let them come to her, both of them, and she did not weep this time. She had spent that. She only held on to the two of them in the dawn and let herself be held by children who had looked at the worst of her in the plainest light and decided, with a clarity she would never fully understand, to keep her anyway. They studied the mark after that because Hermione did not make suggestions she was willing to drop, and it turned out she was right, as she generally was. The arm became a clock. As the spring turned to summer, the stirring grew. By increments Hermione charted, and the 3 of them came to understand that they had a thing no one else in Britain had, a warning wired into Bellatrix's own flesh, counting down to a return that the rest of the world would not see coming. And in the counting down, the world came knocking twice in the same fortnight. The first knock was made of men. They came in the gray hour before a summer dawn, 6 of them, and they came the way the lone scout should have come years before and had not been clever enough to, which meant someone had grown clever, which meant the stirring had begun to draw the old network back toward its center. They did not find the house. The house could not be found. But they found the valley, and they spread across the floor of it and began the patient work of unpicking the outermost of Bellatrix's wards, and the ward's dying flicker woke her, and she stood at the clean window and counted the shapes moving in the mist below and understood that the quiet years were over. She woke the children. There was no question of hiding them in the cellar. They were 11 now, and they were trained, and she had not spent 2 years making them formidable in order to lock them in the dark the first time it mattered. This was the thing she had built them for, though she had prayed in her wordless way that she would never have to spend them on it, and now the day had come and she looked at the two of them pulling on their dueling clothes with their wands already in their hands, and she made the hardest decision of her guardianship, which was to trust the thing she had made. "You do not leave the top of the rock," she said. "That is the one law tonight. I go down to them. You hold the high ground, the two of you, the way we drilled it, Harry between the stair and your sister, Hermione behind the wall doing what your mind does. If any of them get past me, and some may, you do not run and you do not chase. You hold. You are a wall and a mind, and you hold the top of your own rock, and I will come back up it, because I always come back. Say it." "You always come back," they said together, the oldest law in their world, and she went down into the mist to meet the 6 men who had come for her children, and it was the first time she had fought as what she now was rather than what she had been, and the difference was terrible to see. She took 4 of them on the rock path before the other 2 understood that the mist had swallowed their friends. She did not laugh, and she did not play. The old Bellatrix had fought like a cat with a bird, drawing it out, savoring it. This one fought like a door closing, fast and final and without appetite, because up the rock behind her slept everything she had, and every second a man drew breath in her valley was a second too long. 4 of them down in the mist, and the 5th broke past her on the narrow path as she had told the children one might, and went up the rock toward the top, toward the 2 shapes waiting at the head of the stair. He met the wall. Harry stood at the head of the stair with Hermione behind him, exactly where he had been placed, and when the man came up out of the mist with his wand throwing killing light, Harry did not attack him because he was not an attacker. He raised a shield that turned the killing light the way a cliff turns the sea, and he held it 11 years old against a grown man's murder, and he held it because his sister was behind him, and while he held it Hermione did what her mind did. She had spent the climb up the rock, Bellatrix learned afterward, not casting but calculating, reading the man's footing and the wet stone in the angle of the stair. And she reached past Harry's shield with one precise spell, not a curse, a charm, the humblest of charms, and she turned the wet stone under the man's back foot to ice at the exact moment he shifted his weight to press the attack, and he went off the edge of the stair into the mist, and that was the 5th. Bellatrix took the 6th herself at the bottom as he tried to flee the valley to carry word, and she made certain he carried none. Then she climbed her own rock in the thinning mist and came up over the top of the stair and found the 2 of them standing exactly where she had left them, white and shaking and unhurt, Harry's shield only just lowered, Hermione's wand still out, the 2 of them holding the high ground of their own home the way she had taught them, and she stopped at the head of the stair and looked at what she had made, and for once in her life she could not speak. "You came back," Harry said. His voice was not steady. He said it anyway. "I always come back," she said, "and you held, both of you, you held the top of the rock." She crossed to them and put a hand on each of their heads, the language the 3 of them had, and she felt them shaking under her hands, and she did not tell them not to shake, because shaking after was correct. Shaking after was what separated them from the men in the mist, who had felt nothing ever and had died of it. "You held," she said again, because it was the only praise that mattered, and it needed saying twice. "Now come inside. Your sister will want to write down what she learned, and you will want to sit down before you fall down, and I will make the tea, which I do badly, and we will be alive in a warm room together, which is the whole of what winning is. Come." The second knock, a fortnight later, was made of paper, and it frightened her more than the 6 men had. 2 letters came on the same morning, carried by 2 owls that should not have been able to find the rock and had found it anyway, and they were addressed in green ink in a hand Bellatrix knew from her own childhood, and they were addressed not to Harry Black and Hermione Black, but to Mr. H. Potter and Miss H. Granger, the area above the valley, and the naming of the house told her everything, because no living soul was supposed to know the house had a name. Dumbledore had found the rock. He had not found it with force, which was the only thing her wards knew how to refuse. He had found it as he found everything, slowly, patiently, over 10 years, following the thread the child kept leaving, the visits to Andromeda, the books that went missing from the Malfoy library, the scout who came back from a Muggle street certain a Granger house was worthless, 10 years of quiet wrongnesses that meant nothing alone and everything to a man who did not stop and did not forget. And having found it, he had not come with orders. He had sent 2 school letters addressed to the children by the names the world had given them, which was a message, and the message was, I know where he is, I know what you have done, and I have sent, instead of the ministry, an invitation to school." Bellatrix stood at the clean window with the 2 letters in her hand and understood that she had just lost the one thing her rock had given her for a decade, which was the belief that she could not be found, and she understood something else underneath it, which was that the man who had found her had chosen, at the moment of finding, not to take the child but to knock. She did not know yet what that meant. She only knew that the quiet years were doubly over now, ended by 6 men in the mist and by 2 owls in the morning, and that the world she had hidden her children from had reached up the rock at last with a wand in one hand and a school letter in the other, and that she was going to have to decide very soon and with everything at stake which of those two hands to answer. She answered the letter in the end because a letter could be answered from behind a wall and a refusal could not. She wrote 3 lines. She did not sign a name. She said that the children were well and loved and not for sale, and that if the writer wished to speak of them he could come alone to the foot of the valley at the setting of the sun on the 3rd day, unarmed of intention if not of wand, and that if he came with anyone at his back he would find the valley empty and the birds silent and would never find it again. She sent it with his own owl. Then she spent 3 days making certain the second half of her threat was not a bluff, laying the escape routes, drilling the children on the vanishing that would take all 3 of them off the rock and out of the country, inside a minute if the man proved false, so that when she went down the valley to meet the greatest wizard of the age, she went down it able to lose. He came alone on foot at the setting of the sun on the 3rd day, exactly as she had asked, and he was older than she remembered, and he moved more slowly, and he stopped at the foot of the valley and waited, hands loose at his sides, for her to come to him out of the long shadows, and did not reach for the wand she knew was up his sleeve. "Bellatrix," Albus Dumbledore said when she was close enough. He said it without heat, which unsettled her more than fury would have, because she had been braced for fury and had no defense prepared for its absence. Or should I say, from what the last decade tells me, something else. The world has spent 10 years believing I hid Harry Potter. It seems the truth is that you did. I confess it is not a sentence I ever expected to say. You believed you hid him, Bellatrix said. You told the world a story to cover a failure, and then you spent 10 years quietly making the story true in the only way left to you, which was finding him. I know how you found me, the visits, the books, the scout who forgot his errand, 10 small wrongnesses that meant nothing alone. She stopped 6 feet from him, which was the distance at which she could kill him before he finished a word, and she let him see that she knew it was that distance, and she watched him decline to care. You have found the rock. You have sent your letter, say the rest of it, say the part where you take him. I have not come to take him, Dumbledore said. Everyone comes to take him. I imagine they do. He looked up the valley at the rock, at the house he could feel and not quite see, and something moved behind the blue of his eyes that she could not follow and did not trust. I came down this valley, Bellatrix, expecting to find one of 2 things, a prisoner or a weapon. I expected to find that the child who broke the Dark Lord had been taken by the Dark Lord's most faithful and kept these 10 years as a hostage against his return, or shaped these 10 years into a blade to be turned against the world when the return came. I have built a great many plans on one or the other of those. I came to see which. He looked back at her, and the thing behind his eyes was closer to sorrow than to triumph. I have been standing at the foot of your valley for some hours before I called out, long enough to see 3 people come out onto the top of that rock at dusk, not knowing I watched, a woman and 2 children. I saw how the children stood near the woman. I have spent a long life learning to read how the frightened stand near the thing they fear, and it is not how those children stood near you. So I find I have come down this valley to discover a 3rd thing which I had not thought to plan for, and which I do not yet know what to do with. He paused. They are happy. He is happy. You have made the child who broke Voldemort happy, and I do not know whether that is the best thing that has happened in 10 years or the most dangerous. The name, spoken plainly, went through the valley like cold water. She had not heard anyone say it aloud in a decade. Say it again if you like, she said, to cover the way it had landed. It is only a name. He made it a terror. I have spent 10 years teaching 2 children that terrors are things you stand in front of, not things you kneel to. You may find, old man, that the weapon you feared and the happy children you found are the same thing, and that I have forged something more dangerous to him than any blade, which is 2 people who love each other more than they fear him. They talked for an hour at the foot of the valley while the light went out of it, the mass murderer and the headmaster, and neither of them lied, which was its own strange courtesy. He wanted the children at Hogwarts, he said so plainly. He believed the school the safest place in Britain, and he believed the 2 of them needed the world, the ordinary friction of other children, the breadth of teachers who were not one cracked and brilliant woman on a rock. Bellatrix heard him out because some cold, clear part of her knew he was not wholly wrong, that Harry gathered people because he needed people, that a boy raised to be only a wall would grow up thinking the world was only ever a siege. But she weighed it against the other thing, the thing his own arm could not have told him and hers could, and the other thing decided her. He is waking, she said, and pushed back her sleeve and showed Albus Dumbledore the dark mark, faintly alight in the dusk, which was a thing she had shown no one but the children. She watched the old man understand what the glow meant, watched the sorrow in his face deepen into something graver. You feel it too, in your own way, the stirring. You have your own reasons to know he is climbing back toward a body, or you would not have come down this valley in this particular year. So we both know the return is coming, and we both know that when it comes he will want, before all else in the world, the 2 things I have on that rock, the child who unmade him and the servant who betrayed him. You would put both of those inside your castle, among 1,000 other children, and set your teachers to guard them. And I tell you, Albus, that I have hunted for that man and I have killed for that man, and I know exactly what he sends and how it comes. And your castle, for all its towers, is a place he has walked before and will walk again. And I would sooner keep my two on a rock that has turned back everything the world has thrown at it for 10 years. Where the wall stands beside the mind and the woman who loves them both stands in front of the door. Dumbledore was quiet a long moment. You will not let them come, he said. Not yet, not into a castle, not while he wakes. She lowered her sleeve. But I am not the fool my family raised, and I know a boy needs more than a rock and a sister and a monster who loves him. So here is my counter, old man, and you will take it, or you will spend the rest of your years trying to find this valley again, which you will not, because I will move us the moment you turn your back. The children will have the world in pieces I can hold. Diagon Alley guarded, the company of the few I trust guarded, and you. She looked at him and made herself say it because it cost her and because the cost was the proof it was true. You may teach them, yourself, or one you vouch for with your life. Come to the rock unarmed of your schemes and give them what one cracked woman cannot, and in return you will see with your own eyes, term by term, that the weapon you feared is a loved child and not a blade. It is the only bargain I will make. It gives you the child's safety and it gives me his life, and it means that when the man comes back, as he will, we face him together and not as one more thing you failed to hide. Dumbledore looked up the dark valley at the rock and at the invisible house and at whatever a man of his sight could read in the wards she had woven around everything she loved. You have become a strange thing, Bellatrix Black, he said at last, and the surname was deliberate, and it was the first time anyone outside the family had used it, and she took it the way you take a blade turned handle first. I have known monsters who called themselves saved and were only monsters with better manners. You do not call yourself saved, you still stand at killing distance, and let me see you know it. And yet you have raised a happy child and offered your enemy's teacher a place at your table, and shown me the mark on your arm that could hang you all in one evening, for no reason I can find but that you have decided the truth is cheaper to keep than a lie. I do not know what to call what you are, but I will take your bargain. Merlin, help us both, I will take it, because the alternative is to fight you for them, and I have looked at how those children stand near you, and I find I have no wish to win. He left the way he had come, alone on foot, up out of the valley into the dark, and Bellatrix stood at the bottom of her own rock and watched the greatest wizard of the age walk away from her children with a school letter unanswered in his pocket and a bargain in its place. And she climbed the rock in the dark and came up over the top of the stair and found the two of them waiting for her at the head of it, because they had watched the whole hour from the high ground exactly as trained, unable to hear a word. Reading the shapes of it in the dusk, you came back, Harry said. I always come back. She looked at the two of them, 11 and 11, the wall and the mind, standing on the rock that was going to be theirs. And I have brought you a piece of the world, not the castle, not yet, but a teacher in Diagon Alley, in the beginning of the long walk out from behind these wards into the place where you will one day have to stand. You are not going to grow up hidden. I have decided it tonight at the bottom of the valley, watching an old man be wiser than his fear. You are going to grow up guarded, which is a different thing, and a harder one, and the right one. She put a hand on each of their heads. Come inside. The world starts tomorrow, and it will want you rested, and I will make the tea, which I still do badly, and we will be alive in a warm room together, and plan how two black heirs walk into Diagon Alley without the whole of Britain knowing the House of Black has come back from the dead. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. Ashes and old names. The mark burned on a night in June, and it did not stop, and that was how they knew. Bellatrix was at the kitchen table when it came, and she went over backward out of the chair, and Harry, who was 15 now and quick, had his wand out and was across the room before he understood there was no enemy, that the thing on the floor was his guardian with her sleeves smoking and her teeth clenched on a sound she would not let out. The mark had gone from the faint stir it had held for 4 years to a black brand of pain, deep and total, and she lay on the flagstones of her own kitchen and wrote it because there was nothing to fight, because the thing had happened at last that she had felt coming since Harry was 11. He's back, she said when she could. Her voice came out flat and even, which was the frightening way. He has a body, not a wraith, not a possession, a body. The mark does not burn like this for a shadow. She got up off the floor without help, because she would not be helped up in front of them for this, and she pushed back her sleeve and looked at the black thing writhing on her arm, and Harry and Hermione looked at it with her, the three of them around the kitchen table where they had eaten 10,000 ordinary suppers, and the ordinary suppers were over. How long do we have? Hermione asked. She had gone to the drawer where she kept the ledger, the one she had started at 10, the running record of the marks waking, and she had it open on the table with a pencil already moving. She was 15 and she met catastrophe as she met everything, by reaching for the part of it that could be measured. The stirring took 4 years to get here. Is this the end of a timeline or the start of one? The start, Bellatrix said. He is back, but he is weak. Resurrection costs. It will be months before he moves openly, a year before the ministry admits he exists, longer before they stop pretending. He will spend that time gathering the old network quietly the way we gathered against him. and somewhere in that gathering, Hermione, in the first days of it, a man is going to kneel in front of him and give an accounting of the lost years, who died and who turned and who went to ground. She looked at the two of them and she said the thing plainly, because she had never lied to them and would not begin on the worst night. And in that accounting, someone is going to tell him what I did, that his most faithful took the child he died to kill and raised it and named it Heir and made a second heir of a mudblood out of an old dead line. He's going to learn in the first month of his return that Bellatrix betrayed him for the two of you. And there is no fury in this world or the next like the fury he will turn on that. He learned it in the second week. He was not yet strong. The body was new and thin and cold, and it lay much of the day in a high-backed chair in a house that had once been the Riddles, and taxed its strength on small things, the gathering of the scattered, the slow reknotting of the net. They came back to him one at a time, the faithful who had waited and the fearful who had hidden, and they knelt and they gave their accountings, and he took each accounting into himself as he took everything without warmth, weighing the years each man had spent, deciding what each was still worth. Rodolphus Lestrange knelt before him in the second week, and he had rehearsed for 13 years what he would say, and in the end he said it badly because there is no good way to tell the thing he had to tell. My lord. My wife, he stopped. He had been the one all those years ago who had wanted to break the Longbottoms for word of his master, and had done it, and it had won him nothing, and he had spent the years since being nothing, a man whose wife had walked off her own life and taken his standing with her. My wife did not fall in your service, my lord, as the others believe. She turned. The night you fell, she went to Godric's hollow ahead of the oaf, and she took the Potter child out of the cot, and she did not kill it. She kept it. She has kept it 13 years on a rock in Wales that no one has been able to find, and raised it as a black and taken a second child besides, a mudblood, and made heirs of them both. She named him Black. The tapestry took the name. She has spent 13 years, my lord, being the one wall between you and the child who unmade you. There was a silence in the room at the Riddle house that went on long enough that Rodolphus began to hope he might survive it. Then the fury came, and it did not come the way fury came in ordinary men, hot and loud. It came out of Voldemort, cold and total and silent, a drop in the temperature of the room, the candles guttering all at once, the men along the walls going still the way animals go still. He did not rise from the chair. He did not raise his voice. He said in the flat quiet that his oldest servants feared more than any scream, Bellatrix. He had loved her in the only way he was capable of loving, which was to say he had valued her above the others, prized the completeness of her devotion, how she had given him everything and asked for nothing, the one servant whose loyalty he had never once had to buy or compel. She had been the proof to him that he could be worshipped. And she had taken his death and his triumph, the one child who had ever bested him, and made a home of it, made a family of it, made a happy laughing rock in Wales out of the very thing that was supposed to be his to burn. She did not merely betray me, Voldemort said to the room, to himself. Any of you might betray me. Betrayal is fear or greed or weakness, and I know the shape of all three, and I forgive none of them, and I understand all of them. She did something worse. She looked at the thing I built her to be, the perfect instrument, the devotion without a flaw, and she took it whole, unbroken, exactly as I made it, and she turned it. She loves those children the way she loved me, with the same completeness. She did not become weak. That is what you are all failing to understand, and it is why you are afraid, and you are right to be afraid. He rose from the chair at last, thin and terrible in the guttering dark. She is exactly as dangerous as I made her. She simply pointed the other way. And so the first work of my return, before the ministry, before the child who unmade me, before any of it, is this. I will take back what she stole, or I will unmake it so completely that the House of Black is a scorch mark on the wall of the world. Find the rock, find my Bellatrix, and when you have found her, do not touch her, do not touch the children, do not so much as let them feel your eyes. You will bring the location to me, and I will go myself, because this one I do with my own hand. They felt him looking within the month. Hermione's ledger tracked it, the quality of the pressure at the edges of the wards changing, no longer the blunt force of a raiding party, but something patient and vast and cold, sweeping the country in widening arcs, and Bellatrix knew the touch of it as surely as she knew her own name, and she made the decision she had been putting off for 13 years. We come out, she said. They were in the library, the three of them, and Andromeda, who had come up the rock the moment the mark burned and had not left because a healer went toward the wound. Ted had taken the Grangers and Nymphadora somewhere the net could not reach. That had been the first move. The family scattered to the safe corners, and it was a mark of how far the sisters had come that Andromeda had trusted Bellatrix to plan the scattering, and Bellatrix had. Come out, Andromeda repeated. Into what? He is back. The one place you have been safe for 13 years is behind these wards, and your answer to his return is to leave them. The wards turned back everything the world could throw while the world did not know what it was throwing at, Bellatrix said. They will not turn back him. He walked into a house with better wards than these to kill the parents of the child sitting across from you. A wall is only ever as good as the thing on the other side of it, and the thing on the other side is now the worst thing that has ever lived, and it is coming itself with its own hand. I cannot outwall him. I have known that since the mark burned, so I will not try. She stood and went to the window, the clean one, the one she had cleaned of a century's dust the first morning. We have spent 13 years being a secret. A secret is a thing that dies quietly because no one knows to look for the body. I am done being a thing that can die quietly. We are going to become the loudest fact in Britain. The House of Black returned, 2 heirs, named and lawful, standing in the Wisengamot in the light where the whole of the wizarding world can see them. He can murder a secret on a rock. He cannot murder the heirs of an ancient house in front of the ministry and the press and every old family watching to see whether the law still means anything. Not while he is still pretending in these first months that he is not back. I am going to make us too visible to kill in the dark, because the dark is the only place he can win. Hermione had gone very still, following it, and now she looked up, and there was the particular light in her that came when she saw the shape of a plan and found it sound. "Heir law," she said. "That's what you mean. You're not talking about publicity. You're talking about standing. If Harry and I are only your wards, hidden children, then we're nothing the law protects. We're just 2 people who will vanish and no one will ask. But if we're the confirmed heirs of the House of Black, with seats and titles and property, then we're woven into the whole legal body of the wizarding world, and pulling us out means tearing the fabric, and people notice a tear." She was writing again, fast. "It's brilliant. It's exactly right, except..." She stopped. She looked up at Bellatrix, and she was the cleverest person in the room, and she had found the hole before anyone else. "Except you can't confirm us. You named us. You did the right, but you're not the head of the House of Black. You can't grant standing you don't hold. Only the Lord Black can do that legally in a way the Wisengamot has to honor." Her pencil stopped. "And the Lord Black is Sirius, Sirius Black, who's been in Azkaban or on the run from it for 13 years for a murder everyone thinks he did. Harry's godfather, who thinks Harry's dead or hidden, and who thinks you're the woman who..." She did not finish it. She did not have to. Bellatrix looked out the window at the valley she was about to leave. "Who thinks I am the woman who tortured his friends and served the man who killed them," she said. "Yes. Rode out of hiding, runs straight through the one man in Britain with more reason to want me dead than the Dark Lord himself. I have known that since the mark burned too. I have simply been hoping I was wrong about it, and I am not, and hope has never once served me, so we will do it the other way." She turned from the window. "We are going to find Sirius Black, and I am going to hand him the thing he has wanted for 13 years, which is his godson, alive and happy, raised by the cousin he hates. And I am going to ask him, standing in the wreck of everything he believes about me, to make my 2 children his lawful heirs. And he is going to want to kill me, and he may try, and I am going to let him get close enough to see Harry before he does, because it is the only argument I have, and it is the true one." Finding Sirius Black was Andromeda's doing in the end, because the fugitive trusted no one, but a fugitive on the run for 13 years will sometimes trust the one cousin who was thrown off the same wall he was. Andromeda went alone to a cave above a Scottish village where the network's whispers said a great black dog had been seen, and she came back 3 days later with a man who was more bone than man, gray and hunted and half-wild from too long alone, and who came up the valley road with his wand out and his eyes going everywhere, and stopped dead at the foot of the rock when the concealment parted for the black blood in him, and he saw the house at last. He would not come up. He stood at the bottom and he called, and his voice was cracked from disuse and from rage, and what he called was, "Where is he? Andromeda swears he's alive. Bring him where I can see him, or I'll bring this rock down stone by stone. I don't care what's on it. I've nothing left to lose in 13 years of learning how to lose it." Bellatrix came down the rock to him alone, and she did not bring the children, not yet, because she would not spend Harry as a shield before she had faced the man herself. She came down into the open with her wand sheathed in her hands where he could see them, which was not a posture the old Bellatrix had a body for, and she stopped in front of the cousin she had helped the family cast out, as she had once stopped in front of the sister she had helped the family cast out, and she thought distantly that her whole redemption seemed to consist of standing unarmed in front of people she had helped to ruin. "Hello, Sirius," she said. He looked at her, and the 13 years came up in his face, Azkaban and the Dementors and the long cold hunt, and his wand hand shook with how much he wanted to use it. "You," he said, "of all of them, of everyone who could have got their hands on James's son, you the one who laughed, the one who'd have danced on his grave. Andromeda says you've raised him, raised him. I've spent 13 years in a stone box with the Dementors, taking every good thing I ever had, and the one thing they couldn't take was that James's boy was somewhere safe, and now I climb out of hell and find safe meant you." His voice broke. "Give me one reason, one, before I do the thing I've wanted to do to you since we were children." "I cannot give you a reason," Bellatrix said. "I can give you your godson. That is the only argument I have, and it is better than any reason. You have 13 years of knowing exactly what I am, and every year of it is true. I will not take back a day of it or ask you to. I was the thing you remember. I laughed. I would have danced." She held his eyes because he deserved to be looked at while she said it. "And then I stood in the ruin of James's house with his son in a cot, and I raised my wand to finish what my master started, and I could not do it, and I have spent 13 years becoming the wall that stands in front of that child instead of the knife that was sent for him. You do not have to believe a word of it. You should not. Belief is cheap and I have not earned it. So do not believe me, Sirius. Come up the rock and look at him and believe him. He came up the rock. He came with his wand out and Bellatrix walking ahead of him with her back to it, offering him the shot the whole way up, and she felt it aimed at her spine every step and did not quicken her pace. And that more than anything she had said was what made him lower it by the time they reached the top, because a woman who lets you hold a wand to her back all the way up a mountain is either mad or telling the truth, and he had known her his whole life and knew she was both. Harry was waiting at the top because he had refused to be kept below, and Bellatrix had known he would refuse and had let him. And so the first thing Sirius Black saw when he came up over the head of the stair was a boy of 15 with James Potter's face and Lily's eyes, standing on the rock in the evening light, looking at the ragged stranger with the wary open hope of someone who has been told his whole life that he had a godfather out in the world and has just watched him climb into it. Sirius stopped. The wand went all the way down. He looked at the son of his best friend, James made young again with Lily looking out of him, and 13 years of grief and rage came up in Sirius and had nowhere to go, and he stood at the top of the rock and could not speak. "You're serious," Harry said. He had been coached in none of this. Bellatrix had told him only that his godfather was coming and that it would be hard, and had trusted the rest to the thing Harry was, which was a person who walked toward the wounded thing. "She told me about you, not her." He nodded at Bellatrix. "Well, her too lately, but mostly Andromeda and a man called Ted, and there was a photograph of you and my dad. You had a motorbike." His voice was not steady. He went on anyway, which was the bravest thing in him, the thing that had always been the bravest thing in him. "I used to look at it and make up what you were like. I got it wrong. You're sadder than I made you. I'm sorry you were in that place. I'm sorry it took so long for anyone to come. If I'd known where you were, I'd have come. I'd have brought her and she'd have got you out. She gets everyone out. It's the thing she does." And Sirius Black, who had survived Azkaban and the Dementors and 13 years of the worst the world had, who had walked up a mountain meaning to kill the woman at the top of it, crossed the rock to his godson and put his arms around him and broke, finally, completely, the way a man breaks who has been holding himself together with rage alone and has just been handed a reason to put the rage down. Harry held him up. 15 years old, and he held the weight of a grown, broken man as he held a shield, because there was something behind him worth holding it for, and the something was the man himself. Bellatrix stood at the head of the stair and watched her heir mend her cousin, and she did not go to them because it was not her moment, it was theirs, and she had learned at last the difference, which the old Bellatrix never could have. She only guarded the door, which was the thing she was for, while behind her on the rock a family that 3 people had helped to burn began, one broken embrace at a time, to grow back. It took Sirius a week to be able to look at Bellatrix without his hand going to his wand, and it took him a month to say the thing she needed, and he said it in the library with the black-bound family books open on the table and Hermione's heir law diagrams spread across them, because in the end it was Hermione who talked him into it, not with the past but with the future. "I've read everything," Hermione told him, and she had all of it, the whole architecture of the House of Black and its law. "You're the Lord Black, by blood. Whatever your mother did to the tapestry, the lordship came to you when Regulus and your parents died, because there's no one closer. You never claimed it because you were in Azkaban and then on the run, but it's yours, it's been yours for years, and the moment you claim it you can do 3 things no one else alive can do." She counted them off, 15 and unstoppable. "You can confirm Harry and me as your lawful heirs, which weaves us into the law so tightly he can't pull us out in the dark. You can convene the family seat in the Wisengamot, which gives us a voice in the one body that can still slow him down. And you can clear your own name, because the moment you're Lord Black with heirs and standing in a seat, you're not a fugitive raving about innocence. You're the head of an ancient house demanding a trial, and they have to give you one, and we have Pettigrew's trail. Sirius, we've had it for months. Bellatrix's people found it the moment we started looking. We can hand the Wisengamot the actual rat." She sat back. "You've spent 13 years being a thing the world could throw away. Claim the lordship and you become a thing it can't, and you save us doing it. It's the same act. Your freedom and our standing are the same legal move. I've checked it 40 ways. It holds." Sirius looked at the girl and at the diagrams and at Harry beside her and at Bellatrix in the doorway, and he was quiet a long time. "Tauger's purr," he said finally, and it was bitter in his mouth the way it had been bitter in Andromeda's, the motto that had cost them all so much. That's what the House of Black is. That's what it's always been, a family that ate itself alive over a word, and you want me to be its lord, to pick up the thing that ruined every one of us. "I want you to change what the word means," Bellatrix said from the doorway. "That is what we have done on this rock," Sirius, without ever quite saying it. "We took the house that died of purity and we filled it with the things it was built to burn. A mudblood heir, a Muggle-born's husband who taught Harry to fish, a healer who married out. A godfather framed and thrown away. Look at who is in this house. Not one of us is pure. Every one of us was cast out or should have been by the old word, and the house is more alive than it has been in 300 years. She came into the room and she put her hand flat on the black-bound book on the table, the family's oldest law. be the Lord that ends the old meaning, confirm the heirs that make a lie of the motto. It is the only revenge worth having on the thing that put you in that box, and it saves the two children you are looking at, and it is, as it happens, the only good any of us can still do. Say yes, cousin. You have been saying no to this family your whole life, and you were right to until now. Say yes to what it is becoming instead of no to what it was. He said yes. They did it on the night of the new moon, the way the family did its true business, in front of the small tapestry that had taken two names and left the rest of the tree burning. And Sirius Black claimed the lordship of the House of Black with the old words and the old blood, and the tapestry answered him, the ancient magic recognizing its head, and then he named Harry and Hermione his lawful heirs, confirming what Bellatrix had begun 13 years before. And the two names at the bottom of the tree flared gold and steadied, and were, from that night, unassailable in law. And when it was done, and the old magic had settled, Sirius did a thing no one had asked him to do. He took his wand and he touched it to the top of the tapestry, to the two words woven there in gold 300 years gone, Tauger's Purr, and he spoke a small old spell of the family's own, the one that unpicked a name from the cloth, the one they had used to burn Andromeda off the wall, the one Bellatrix had helped cast. He turned it on the motto instead of a name. The gold thread of the old words loosened and unwound, and the lie that had ruled them for 3 centuries came apart thread by thread and fell away to nothing, and the top of the tapestry was blank, waiting the way the space beneath Harry's name had once waited. "We'll want a new one," Sirius said, echoing a thing Bellatrix had said to 2 children on this spot years before without knowing she had said it. "In time, when we've earned it, not tonight." He looked at the blank space where the old cruelty had been. "Tonight it's enough that the worst word this family ever loved is off the wall, and that everyone still in the room is someone it would have thrown away." Narcissa came up the rock in the open the week after, for the first time in 16 years, and she brought her son. She could not stay hidden any longer, and she had known it since the mark burned. The Dark Lord was back, and Lucius had gone to him the first night gladly, the way Bellatrix had warned he would 16 years before, and Narcissa had watched her husband kneel to the thing that had once tried to spend their son, and she had made, at last, the choice she had been too frightened to make when Draco was a baby in her arms. She packed what mattered, and she took her boy, and she walked out of the Malfoy holdings into the one place in Britain that would have her, and she came up the rock in the daylight with her pale head high, done hiding. Draco came up behind her, 15 and pale and furious and frightened, a boy raised his whole life to want one thing, and standing now on a rock that made a lie of all of it. He had grown up on his father's certainties, and he had also, twice a year every year of his childhood, come to a valley in Wales where a cousin shared his whole world without weighing it, and the 2 educations had been at war in him for 16 years, and the week his father knelt to the Dark Lord was the week the war in Draco ended. He looked at Harry across the rock, the cousin who had taken the contempt off him at 5 without noticing he was doing it, and he did not have the words for why he had come, so he said the only true thing he had. "He's going to spend us," Draco said. "My father can't see it. He thinks kneeling buys us something. It doesn't. It never did. He'll spend the Malfoys the way he spent everyone, and my father will thank him for the privilege on the way down." His voice cracked, 15 and losing a father to a thing that wore a father's approval. "You told me once there was a place where I wasn't weighed. I didn't believe you. I thought you were soft. I've had 16 years to work out which of us was soft, and it wasn't you." He looked at Bellatrix in the doorway, the aunt the whole world feared, and lifted his chin in the way the Blacks all had. "I want to stand with the house that takes people in, not the one that spends them. If you'll have a Malfoy who was too much of a coward to see it until his father knelt." "We are the house that takes people in," Bellatrix said. "It is the only thing we are for now. Come inside, both of you." And Narcissa crossed the rock to her sister, and the two of them did not embrace because they had never learned how, but Narcissa took her hand, the left one, and turned it over, and pressed her thumb once to the mark as she had on a gray morning 16 years before, and this time neither of them was hiding, and that was the whole of what had changed, and it was everything. The rat was the key that turned all the other locks, and they had it within the week, because Bellatrix's old network had been tracking Peter Pettigrew for months without knowing why she wanted him, only that she paid well and asked no questions, and a hunted man who has spent 13 years as a rat in other men's houses leaves a trail if you know the smell of fear to follow. They took him alive. That was Hermione's insistence, and she was right, because a dead Pettigrew cleared no one, and a live one, held under a truth charm before witnesses, cleared everything. Sirius wanted to kill him. He stood over the sniveling gray man they had bound to a chair in the library, the man who had sold James and Lily and let Sirius rot for it, and his wand hand shook the way it had shaken, pointed at Bellatrix, and it was Harry who stopped him again, because stopping the people he loved from becoming the worst version of themselves was turning into the work of Harry's life. "He's not worth what killing him would cost you," Harry said. "You've been a thing the world threw away for 13 years because everyone believed a lie. Don't hand them the truth of it now at the end by making the lie real. Walk him into the ministry alive. Let them see the rat that did it. Then you're not the murderer they said. You're the man they wronged. That's worth more than his life, and you know it, and I'm not going to let you throw it away for the pleasure of a second you'll regret for the rest of your life. I've seen what regret does. I live with someone who carries 13 years of it. Don't start your own pile tonight. Sirius lowered the wand. James would be unbearable about you, he said unsteadily. He'd never shut up, his son talking sense into me. He'd dine out on it for a century. They walked into the Ministry of Magic on a Tuesday morning in the full light, and by Wednesday the whole of Wizarding Britain was talking of nothing else. Sirius Black, presumed the worst mass murderer of the age, walked into the atrium with a squirming silver rat in a warded cage and the Lord Black's signet on his hand, and demanded, not begged, demanded, the trial he had been denied for 13 years, and the law, faced with a live pedigree and an ancient lordship lawfully claimed, could not refuse him. It took the Wisengamot 2 days to unmake 13 years of certainty. The truth charm did the rest. Peter Pettigrew, weeping, confessed the whole of it before the assembled court, the secret-keeping and the betrayal and the street full of muggles he had killed to fake his own death, and Sirius Black walked out of the ministry at the end of it a free man and the confirmed head of one of the oldest houses in Britain, and the press did not know which half of the story to run first. He gave them the second half himself, on the steps, because timing was a weapon and Hermione had taught him how to hold it. He stood on the ministry steps before the gathered quills and he announced that the House of Black, thought extinct in all but name, had heirs, 2 of them, lawfully confirmed, and he brought them out to stand beside him in the light. Harry and Hermione walked out onto the ministry steps in the robes of an ancient house, 15 years old, and the wizarding world got its first look at the 2 children who had been raised in secret on a rock in Wales, and did not know most of it, that the young man with the untidy black hair and the scar half hidden under it was the child it had spent 14 years believing was hidden safe somewhere by Dumbledore. That revelation Sirius kept back, for now, a card held against later need. He gave them only the House of Black, returned with 2 heirs, and it was enough to fill a week of headlines, and it did the one thing Bellatrix had sent them to do, which was to weave 2 children so tightly into the visible law of the wizarding world that pulling them out in the dark became impossible without tearing the whole cloth. Bellatrix watched it from a shadowed alcove off the atrium, under a glamour, because she could not stand in the light. She was still, in the eyes of that ministry, a mass murderer who had vanished after the fall, and her face on those steps would have undone everything. So she stood in the dark at the edge of her family's triumph and watched her 2 heirs face down the whole press of the wizarding world with their chins up in the way they both had, Harry the Wall and Hermione the Mind, standing exactly as she had taught them to stand on the top of their rock, and she understood the price of what she had built, which was that the love that had made them could never be seen standing next to them. She had raised 2 children the world would now watch and celebrate, and she would spend the rest of it in the alcoves, in the dark at the edge of the light, guarding a door no one would ever know she stood at. She found she did not mind. It was, after all, the thing she was for. Hermione found her afterward in the alcove because Hermione found everything. She slipped out of the crush of quills and into the dark where her guardian stood, and she did not say anything clever for once. She just leaned against Bellatrix's side in the shadow, 15 years old and steady from an hour of being stared at by the whole world, and said, "You should have been out there. It was yours. All of it was yours. It isn't fair that you have to watch from the dark." "Fair is a thing children believe in," Bellatrix said, "and I have spent 13 years making certain you 2 could afford to. Do not spend the belief on me. I am the last person in Britain who ever earned it." But she put her arm around the girl in the dark, briefly, which she did not often do, and the 2 of them watched Harry handle the press through the alcove's mouth, and it was enough. The night before they went back to the rock, Harry found Hermione on the flat stone above Grimmauld Place's hidden garden where the London stars were thin, and they talked the way they had talked since they were 7 and 8, which was to say without any of the guards the rest of the world got. "He's going to come for us," Hermione said. She was not asking, she had done the arithmetic as she did all of it, and it had come out the same every time. "We made ourselves too visible to kill in the dark, which was the right move, it was the only move, but it doesn't make him not come, it makes him come differently. It makes him come in a way that can't be quiet, which buys us time, but at the end of the time he still comes, and when he does it'll be everything he has, because you're the one who unmade him and Bellatrix is the one who betrayed him, and I'm the impossible thing his whole world was built to say couldn't exist." She pulled her knees up. "I've read everything there is to read about him. I know his history better than anyone alive except maybe Dumbledore, and I still can't find the answer. There's no spell, there's no clever move. I've looked, I've filled 4 notebooks. He's beaten death, Harry. How do you beat a thing that's already beaten death?" Harry sat down beside her on the cold stone and put his shoulder against hers the way he had since they were children, the wall going up without a word. "You're doing the thing where you carry all of it alone," he said. "You've been doing it since the ministry." You get quiet and you go somewhere in your head where you think if you're just clever enough you can solve it for all of us, and then you won't have to be afraid, because being afraid feels to you like failing. He said it gently because he knew her as well as she knew everything else. You don't have to have the answer tonight. That's not your job tonight. Tonight your job is to be a person on a rock looking at the stars with the person who's going to stand in front of you when it comes. I'll be the wall. That's what I'm for. You be the mind when there's a problem to solve, and be a person the rest of the time, and let me carry the being afraid when it's too heavy, the way you carry the being clever when it's too heavy for me. That's the deal. That's been the deal since we were kids. It still holds. Hermione looked at him in the thin London starlight, the young man who had climbed a ladder to reach her a book 8 years before and had been reaching things for her ever since, and something passed between the two of them that had been growing so slowly for so long that neither had marked the day it changed from one thing into another. She did not name it. She was 15, and there was a war coming, and some things you did not say out loud until the world was quiet enough to hear them. But she let her head rest against his shoulder, and he let it, and the two heirs of the House of Black sat on a cold stone above a hidden garden and looked at the stars, and were, for one held hour before everything, simply two people who had found each other and were not going to be moved. Far to the east, in a cold house that had been the Riddles, a thin and terrible man felt the old magic of the House of Black move, felt a lordship claimed and heirs confirmed and a motto unmade, felt his stolen prize woven suddenly into the deep law of the wizarding world where he could not reach it in the dark, and understood that Bellatrix had done again the thing she had always done better than any of them, which was to move first and to move completely. And he sat in the cold and he made his own accounting, and he marked the House of Black for the fire, the whole of it, the Lord and the Guardian and the two heirs and every scattered soul that sheltered under its name. And he began, with the patience of a thing that had already conquered death once, to gather what it would take to burn them out of the world. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The gathering dark. The war took 2 years to come to full boil, and by the time it did the heirs were 17 and the world had stopped pretending. The ministry had fallen in the spring, the way rotten things fall, all at once after a long quiet giving way, and the wizarding world had woken one morning to find that the men who kept the ledgers now kept the ministry too, and that the word had gone out from a cold house in the country that the old order was ended. Dumbledore was dead. That was the fact that hollowed everything else. He had fallen at the hand of one of his own, betrayed on his own tower, and with him had gone the last power in Britain that the Dark Lord had ever troubled to fear, and the fear had passed undivided onto the one house that had refused to kneel. The House of Black had become the thing the resistance gathered behind, which was not a thing Bellatrix had planned, and was a thing she could not now prevent. Grimmauld Place, unhidden and rewarded and made a fortress, held the ones who would not bend, Andromeda and her healer's hands, the Order's survivors, the old families who had discovered too late that they preferred the house that took in a mudblood to the Lord who spent them all. Sirius stood at the head of it, cleared and loud and alive, the Lord Black who had come back from the dead to make war on the thing that had killed his friends. And behind the fortress, behind all of it, on the rock in Wales that still could not be found, stood the two heirs and the woman who had raised them, because Bellatrix had agreed to let the house be a banner only on the condition that its most precious part stayed hidden on the rock where nothing had ever reached it. Narcissa held the fortress with Sirius done hiding, a Malfoy in name and a Black in every choice she made now, and she turned out to be as formidable in a war room as her husband had always been useless in one, so that the resistance moved on her cold clean, planning the way it fought on Sirius's fire. Draco fought. That was the thing that told the old families which way the wind had truly turned, more than any speech. Lucius Malfoy's son, 17 now and grim with it, stood under the black banner and raised his wand against the men his father knelt to, and every wavering house that saw it understood that the war was no longer pure blood against the rest, but something older and simpler, the houses that spent their people against the house that kept them. Lucius sent word twice through intermediaries ordering his son home. Draco did not answer the first. To the second he sent back a single line which Bellatrix framed and hung in the fortress war room because it was, she said, the finest thing a Malfoy had produced in 3 generations. I am home. The rock taught me what the word meant. You should have come with me when you had the chance. She had one advantage no one else in the war possessed, and it was buried in her own arm. The mark told her things. It burned when he was near, ached when he was angry, went cold and quiet when he was pleased, and Bellatrix had spent 2 years reading it the way a sailor reads a sky, and it had kept her family a step ahead of the dark through 100 nights that would otherwise have ended them. Hermione had charted it into something almost precise. They knew, most days, roughly where he was and roughly what he intended, and it had saved them again and again. It was the thing that failed them the night they took Hermione, because on that night he had made certain the mark told Bellatrix nothing at all. He had learned. That was the terror of him, the thing that made him different from every other enemy they had faced. He learned and he adjusted, and he did not make the same mistake twice. He had spent 2 years watching the House of Black turn back everything he threw at it, and he had understood at last that he could not break the rock and could not outfight the woman on it, and so he had stopped trying to reach the thing she guarded and started reaching for the thing she could not guard, which was the moment her heirs stepped off the rock into the world. They did step off it. They had to. A banner that never leaves its tower is no banner, and Sirius needed the heirs seen, at the fortress, at the councils, moving among the ones who fought under the black name, and Bellatrix had let them go because keeping them caged would have made cowards of them, and she had not raised cowards. She sent them guarded, she sent them warded to the teeth. She had believed the warding enough. They took Hermione from a supply run to the fortress on an ordinary gray afternoon, and they did it in a way that Bellatrix, dissecting it afterward in a fury that frightened even Sirius, could only admire for its cruelty. They did not attack the two heirs together, because together the wall and the mind could not be broken. They had proven that a dozen times. They waited for the half-second the run required them to split, Harry drawn one way by a staged skirmish that was never meant to catch him. Hermione left for the length of a breath at the fortress threshold with only her own considerable defenses, and in that breath a wizard who had been hidden inside the fortress's own supply chain for a month, a face no one had flagged because he had been careful and patient and utterly ordinary, took her through a portkey that should not have worked inside the wards and did. Because he had spent a month learning exactly where the wards were thin, and the mark told Bellatrix nothing because the Dark Lord had not gone near the taking. He had sent it out through a lieutenant at a distance, deliberately, so that his own presence never came close enough to warm the black brand on his traitor's arm. He had used the knowledge of his own weapon against the woman who had turned it. Bellatrix understood that within the hour, and it was the coldest she had felt since the night the mark first burned, because it meant he had thought about her specifically at length and built a trap shaped exactly to the woman she had become. Harry came off the stage skirmish untouched and found his sister gone, and for a moment the wall came down entirely, and it was Bellatrix, arriving at the fortress a minute later with murder in every line of her, who put it back up. "Not now," she said to him, and took his face in both her hands hard, the way you grip a thing that is sliding. "You do not get to fall apart now. You get to fall apart after, when she is home, and I will fall apart with you. I promise you that. I will sit on the floor of the rock and come apart at the seams, but not now. Now we are the wall, and we are the thing that does the taking back, and I need you cold, Harry. I need the coldest wall you have ever built, because your sister needs the two of us to be exactly what we are and not what we feel. Look at me. Are you with me? Are you cold?" Harry looked at her, 17 years old with his sister in the dark somewhere, and he found the cold because she had taught him where it was, and he went into it as he went into a shield. "I'm with you," he said. "I'm cold. Get her back." "We get her back," Bellatrix corrected. "You and I and your godfather and your aunt and every soul under the black name who can hold a wand. He has made the first mistake he has made in 2 years. He thinks he has taken a hostage. He has not taken a hostage. He has taken the one thing this whole family will burn the world down to recover, and he has told me by taking her exactly where to point the fire." She let go of Harry's face. "Come. Your sister is cleverer than everyone who took her put together. She will be leaving us a road. Our only job is to be worthy of it." Hermione woke in a cellar that was not a cellar and began, before the fear could finish arriving, to work. She had been raised by a woman who drilled her from the age of 8 in what to do when the world went dark and hostile, and the drilling held now the way Harry's shields held, a thing so deep it ran before thought. She did not scream. She did not waste strength on the bindings, which she assessed in the first 10 seconds as beyond her wandless strength to break. She took inventory instead, as she took inventory of everything, and she catalogued the room, the guards, the intervals, the small tells of the place, and above all she catalogued the thing that mattered most, which was that they had not killed her, which meant she was bait, which meant she had time, which meant her job was to survive the time and gather. And she gathered something no one had meant her to gather. They kept her because it amused the man who kept the ministry now to keep her there, in a house that had once belonged to a family called Gaunt, in a hidden room the Dark Lord used for a thing she did not at first understand. She understood it on the second day when he came. He did not come for her, she was beneath his coming. He came for the room, and he did a thing in it she watched through her lashes with her whole trained mind screaming to remember every particle of it, because he took from a hidden place in the wall an object, a small dark ugly thing, a cup, and he held it the way a man holds a part of himself, and he did to it a piece of magic that Hermione, who had taken apart the deepest arts of the House of Black on a library floor, recognized in her bones as wrong in a way she had no word for, a magic of division. Of a soul made to hold itself in a thing outside its body. He had torn himself. That was the shape of the wrongness. She had read in the oldest and most forbidden of the black-bound books a single line about the darkest magic there was, the fracturing of a soul to anchor it against death, and she had thought it a horror story of the old families, and here it was in a cup in a dead man's house, and the man who kept the ministry had done it not once but many times. She could feel the manyness of it, the way you can feel that a struck bell is one of a set. He had made himself a thing that could not die because the dying part of him was scattered across the world in ugly hidden objects, and Hermione Granger, bound in a cellar as bait, understood in one cold flash the answer she had filled 4 notebooks failing to find. You could not beat a thing that had beaten death, but you could unmake the beating. You could find the scattered pieces and end them, and then the thing was only a man again, a torn and lessened man, and a man could be faced. It was not a spell. It was a hunt, and a hunt she now knew the shape of, because she had watched him hide a piece of himself in a cup with her own eyes. And if there was one, there were others, and the House of Black had, in its deepest arts, exactly the right for finding a scattered soul, because the old family had spent 300 years obsessed with the continuance of a bloodline and had learned, along the way, how to trace the pieces of a thing across the world. She held the knowledge still and did not let it show on her face, and she waited for the road she was leaving to be walked. Bellatrix found the house the way Hermione had known she would, because Hermione had left the road. She had left it in the only ink she had, which was her own magic. Every witch's casting has a flavor, and Hermione, in the moments the guards left her alone, had spent her wandless strength not on the futile bindings, but on the smallest workings she could manage, threads of her own magic pushed out through the thin places in the house's wards, faint as breath, meaningless to anyone who did not know the exact taste of Hermione Granger's magic. Bellatrix knew it. She had felt it grow from a caught book in a shop to the most disciplined casting in Britain, and when the first faint thread of it reached the edge of her searching, she knew her daughter's hand as she knew her own, and she followed the threads home. They went to the gaunt house on the 3rd night, and they went as the whole House of Black, because Bellatrix had learned, on a rock over 16 years, that she was strongest not alone, but standing in front of the ones she loved, with the ones she loved standing behind her. Sirius came, Lord Black with his name cleared and his wand hungry. Andromeda came because there would be wounds. And Harry came at the front beside Bellatrix, the wall and the woman who taught it, and the two of them went through the outer defenses of that house like a door closing, fast and final, because his sister was inside and every second was a second too long. The Dark Lord was not there. That was the trap inside the trap, and Bellatrix smelled it a heartbeat too late, because she had let the fury move her faster than the caution, the one thing she had sworn she would never let happen, and had let happen because it was Hermione. He had never meant to be there. He had left Hermione as bait with a lieutenant and a dozen wands and a message, and the message was waiting for Bellatrix in the cellar when she blew the door of it off its hinges and found her daughter bound and alive and unhurt, and found, hovering in the air above her, a thing the Dark Lord had left to speak with his own voice. Bellatrix. It was his voice, cold and exact, wound into a coil of dark magic that turned to face her as she came in. You came, of course. I built this so you would come. Not to kill you. If I wanted the girl dead, she would be dead, and you would have come to a corpse. I want you to hear me in the one place you cannot pretend you did not. The coil turned. Come back to me. That is the whole of the message. I have thought about it a great deal, which is more than I have ever given any of the others. Come back and bring me the one who unmade me, and I will forgive the 16 years. I will forgive them entirely. You were always the best of them, Bella, the only one whose devotion I never had to compel, and I find to my own surprise that I would rather have you back than have you dead. Keep the girl if you have grown sentimental. I do not care about the girl. Bring me Potter and come home and be again the thing I made you, which was magnificent, which these children have made small. You know it is true. You were a storm and they have made you a hearth. Come back and be a storm again. Bellatrix stood in the cellar with her daughter bound at her feet and her son at her shoulder, and the voice of the man who had owned her turning in the air. And for one moment, one honest moment she would tell them about later because she did not lie to them, the old pull came up in her. The memory of being a storm, of being pointed, of the terrible, glad certainty. He had built the trap well. He had aimed it at the truest crack in her, the one she had stood on a rock all night fighting years before. He knew her, he had made her, he knew exactly which word would reach. She reached down and untied her daughter and lifted her up and put her behind Harry where the wall was, and then she turned to the coil of the Dark Lord's voice and she said the truest thing she had ever said, in the flat, even tone that had once made grown men study the floor. You made me a storm, she said, because a storm has no home and so will go anywhere its master points it. That was the genius of you. You did not make me loyal, you made me empty and called the emptiness devotion and pointed it. And I was magnificent, you are right, I was the most magnificent empty thing in Britain. She stepped toward the coil, and it was the old Bellatrix in her step, the terrible one, come back at last but turned all the way around. And then I filled up. That is the whole of what happened to me, my lord, the thing you cannot understand because you have spent your whole existence hollowing yourself out to cheat a death you were too small to face. I filled up, and a full thing does not go where it is pointed. A full thing stands in front of what it loves and does not move. You did not lose a servant 16 years ago. You lost a weapon and gained an enemy, and the difference, which you will learn too late, is that a weapon can be taken back and an enemy has to be killed, and I am a great deal harder to kill than I ever was to point. She raised her wand at the coil of his voice. Here is my message back. I am not coming home. I am home. And I am going to take from you the one thing you stole from the world when you tore yourself apart to escape your ending, which is your ending. I am going to give you back your death. Tougers, she stopped because the old word was off the wall now and gone. No, not that. We took a new one. My children and I ask me what it is when I come for you. You will not enjoy the answer. She unmade the coil with a word, and it screamed once in his voice and was gone, and the cellar was only a cellar, and the lieutenant and the dozen wands upstairs were about to have the worst night of their lives. They fought their way out, and it cost them, because it always costs. The dozen wands upstairs were the Dark Lord's better people, left to make the recovery of Hermione expensive, and they made it expensive. Bellatrix went up the cellar stairs first, and she did not climb them carefully as she had descended. She came up them as she had once been infamous for coming into a fight, a storm with a home now, and the difference was terrible to watch. But there were 12 of them, and the house was theirs, and in the middle of it a curse meant for Harry's back found Sirius instead, because Sirius put himself in front of it, Lord Black shielding his brother's son the way his brother had died shielding him, and it took him in the chest and put him down, and Andromeda was across the room and on her knees beside him before he finished falling. Harry got Hermione out. That was his one job, and he did it. The wall and the mind reunited, Hermione's hands freed and her wand back in them within seconds of the fighting starting, the two of them together again and therefore unbreakable, cutting a path to the door that none of the 12 could hold. And Bellatrix held the room behind them so nothing followed, and when the last of the 12 was down, she went to her cousin on the floor and looked at what the curse had done, and looked at Andromeda's face over the wound, and read there the thing a healer's face cannot hide. Sirius Black did not die in the Gaunt House. Andromeda's hands were too good and too fast for that. The curse had been a cruel one, a slow unmaking, and it had gone deep before she caught it, and when they carried the Lord Black home to the fortress that night he was alive and he was diminished. A man who would carry the mark of that curse in his chest for whatever time he had left, and everyone who loved him understood, without anyone saying it, that he had spent something in the Gaunt House that he was not going to get back. Worth it, Sirius said, grey against the pillows, when Harry sat with him after. He gripped Harry's hand with what strength the curse had left him. Don't you dare wear a face about it. I spent 13 years in a box for a thing I didn't do. Getting cursed pulling James's son out of the fire is the first honest wound I've taken in my life. I'd take it again tomorrow. Now stop looking at me like a funeral and go find your sister. She's got that look, the one where she's worked something out and she's frightened of it. Go on, that look's always been more important than me. Hermione had worked something out and she was frightened of it, and she told them all at once in the war room of the fortress because it was too large to tell twice. She told them what she had seen in the Gaunt House. The cup and the tearing and the wrongness of a soul made to hold itself outside a body. She told them what it meant, laying it out with the pitiless clarity she brought to the worst things, that the Dark Lord could not be killed while the scattered pieces of him remained, that every death he had cheated was anchored in an object hidden somewhere in the world, and that they had all been fighting for 2 years, a man who could not lose because losing was a thing he had made himself immune to. And then she told them the other half, the half that was hope, and it was the House of Black's own deep magic that carried it. The family spent 300 years obsessed with bloodlines, she said, with continuance, with tracing a line across generations, across distances, across death. I thought it was vanity. It's not only vanity, it's a technology. The old black arts can trace the pieces of a thing scattered across the world because that is precisely what a bloodline is, a thing scattered and connected, and the right that traces an heir can be turned to trace a soul. She had the black-bound books open and her own notebooks over them, years of them. I can build it, the finding right. It will show us where he's hidden the pieces of himself, all of them, because the magic that connects a family can be turned to read the magic that connects a torn soul to its anchors. But she stopped, and this was the part she was frightened of, and she made herself say it plainly because she was Hermione and plainness was the only honesty she trusted. The right needs 2 things the family arts have always needed and the family never once had. It needs 2 heirs bound in true kinship, not blood but chosen, the wall and the mind, because it takes both to hold the working, one to reach and one to anchor. That's us. We're the first pair of true chosen heirs the House of Black has produced in 300 years, which is why the tapestry wanted 2, which is why it left the space. It was waiting for a pair that could do this. And it needs a 3rd thing at the end to turn the finding into an unmaking. She looked up and she looked at Bellatrix. It needs someone willing to stand between the torn soul and the world and refuse to move while it's unmade through them. It needs a wall the size of a life, and I have read it 40 ways, and there's no version where that part is safe. The war room was quiet. Bellatrix looked at the girl she had claimed off a bookshop floor, and at the son she had lifted out of a cot, and at the right spread across the table that could give the world back its ending, and she understood that the whole of the last 16 years, the rock and the wards and the training and the love, had been the House of Black growing without any of them intending it, the exact instrument required to end the thing she had once served. 2 heirs bound in chosen kinship, a wall the size of a life. The old dead names on the tapestry had spent 3 centuries breeding for purity and had bred, in the end, the one pair of children and the one redeemed monster who could do the thing purity never could, which was to stand in front of the world and refuse to move. I will be the wall, Bellatrix said. There was no question in it, and she let there be none. That part is mine. It was always going to be mine. I have been standing in front of the two of you for 16 years. I will stand in front of you one more time, and this time I will not move, and if the not moving is the price of giving the world back its ending, then it is the cheapest thing I have ever bought, and I have bought some cheap things. She looked at Harry, who had gone white, and at Hermione, who had gone still. Do not, she said gently, which on her face was the most frightening thing of all. Do not either of you start. I raised you to face the thing, not to bargain with it. This is the thing. We build the right. We find the pieces, we end them. And then we go to him with a torn and lessened man waiting for us, and we give him back his death, and I stand in the door while it's done. That is the plan. It is a good plan. It is the best plan any of us has made in 2 years, and your sister made it out of a cellar with her hands tied, and we are going to be worthy of it. The finding right took Hermione 11 days to build and 1 night to cast, and the casting of it was the strangest and largest magic any of them had ever stood inside. She built it out of the deepest of the black-bound books and out of her own reconstruction of them, the leaner, truer version of the black arts she had been quietly perfecting since she was 10, and when it was ready she drew it on the floor of the oldest room in Grimmauld Place, a great figure of silver and salt and blood that was not, when you looked at it long enough, a diagram at all but a map of a bloodline. Of a family scattered across generations and gathered by the magic that connects the scattered. The right did not care that the thing they meant to trace was a soul and not a family. Scattering was scattering, connection was connection. The old magic knew how to follow a thread from a living hand back to the source it came from, and a torn soul was only a source that had learned obscenely to send its threads into objects instead of into children. They cast it together, the two heirs, because it required both, and this was the moment the tapestry had waited 300 years to see. Hermione knelt at the center of the figure and reached, her mind the finest instrument the House of Black had ever produced, sending herself out along the threads of the torn soul as she had once sent her magic through the thin places of a cellar wall. And Harry knelt behind her with his hands on her shoulders and was the anchor, the wall, the thing that held her to her own body while her mind walked out across the country into the dark hidden places where a monster had hidden the pieces of himself. If he faltered, she would be lost out there, scattered with the thing she hunted. He did not falter. He had been a wall since he was 3 years old and took a door off its hinges without breaking it, and he was a wall now, immovable, while the girl he loved walked her mind through hell and came back with a map. It was terrible to watch, and it was beautiful, and Bellatrix, standing at the edge of the silver figure guarding the working as she guarded everything, saw the old dead names on the family tapestry made suddenly worth something, saw 3 centuries of obsessive, cruel bloodline magic redeemed in a single night by 2 children who loved each other, turning the family's darkest art toward the destruction of the darkest wizard, and she did not have a name for what she felt, so she did not try to give it one. Hermione came back at dawn, gray and hollowed and triumphant, and she had the map, all of it, every hidden piece. They spent the last weeks of the autumn taking the pieces of him out of the world, and it cost them, because it always costs. There were 6 of them, the scattered anchors, hidden in the places a proud and secretive man hides the parts of himself he cannot bear to lose. In a cave over a cold sea, behind a wall of dark old magic, in the vault of a family that had thought itself favored, in the ruin of the house where he was born, in objects that had belonged to the founders he worshipped, a cup and a locket and a diadem and a ring. The House of Black went after them as a house, and where the old family had once hunted for sport, Bellatrix now hunted to end a war, and the difference was in every clean, fast strike. The finding was the hard part, and Hermione had done it. The unmaking of each piece was hard in its own way, because the pieces did not want to die. They fought, they whispered, they showed each of them the thing they most feared to keep them from the striking blow. The locket showed Bellatrix the storm she had been, magnificent and empty, and told her the children would leave her the moment they no longer needed her wand, and she looked at the vision of her own worst fear, and she said, "They saw the worst of me on a rock in the dawn and stayed," and she destroyed it. The cup showed Harry a world where he had failed to be the wall and everyone behind him had fallen, and he looked at it and said, "Then I won't fail," and he destroyed it. The diadem showed Hermione a proof that she did not truly belong, that she was a mudblood playing at an old name, that the tapestry had made a mistake, and she looked at the oldest wound she had, the one from before the bookshop, from a whole childhood of being the strange girl no one stood near, and she said, "I was chosen, twice, by a right and by a boy. Belonging isn't blood, it's being kept, and I have been kept," and she destroyed it. Piece by piece, over the gray weeks, they took him out of the world, until the map in Hermione's mind showed only 2 threads remaining. One was a great snake that never left the Dark Lord's side, an anchor he kept close because he had grown, at the end, afraid to scatter the last of himself too far. And the other was the Dark Lord himself, the torn core of him, the thing that could only be reached by facing him in the flesh at the cold house that had been the Riddles, which he had made his fortress and his throne. Two left, Hermione said in the war room over the map she could see and no one else could. The snake and him, and they're together, and there at the center of everything he has left, surrounded by every wand still loyal to him. She looked up at the three of them, Bellatrix and Harry in Sirius Grey against his pillows, the family that had grown back around a burned tree. There's no clever way to reach them. I've looked. I filled a notebook looking. The snake and the last of his soul are in the one place we can't sneak into and can't besiege, and the only way to end them is to go there, all of us, and cut through everything between us and him, and do the last of the right in the middle of it, with him fighting back with the whole of what he is. She closed the notebook. It's not a plan I like, it's the only plan there is. We go to him, we cut to the center. Harry and I do the unmaking, and Bellatrix stands in the door and doesn't move. That's the end of it, that's the whole of the end of it. Then that is what we do, Bellatrix said. We have taken 5 pieces of him out of the world in 6 weeks. 2 remain, and they are together, which means the last of the war is a single fight in a single place on a single night, and I have spent 16 years preparing the 3 of us for exactly one fight in exactly one place. She looked at them, the wall and the mind and the wounded lord, and in the doorway Andromeda, who would come because there would be wounds. We rest 3 days, we heal what can be healed, and then we go to the cold house as the House of Black, and we give him back his death, all of it, every piece, and we come home, say it. We come home, they said, and only Bellatrix, who had made the right her own and knew the price of the wall, did not quite say it with them, and no one but Hermione noticed, and Hermione said nothing, because some things you do not say until the world is quiet enough to hear them, and the world was not quiet yet. Harry found Hermione on the roof of the fortress on the last quiet night, under the London stars, which were the same thin stars they had looked at 2 years before on the night everything had been ahead of them and not yet arriving. They were 17 now. The war had made them older than 17. And the thing that had been growing between them since a bookshop, the thing neither had named because there had never been a world quiet enough to say it in, sat between them on the cold roof and would not tonight be unspoken any longer, because Hermione had built a right that might cost the woman who raised them her life, and Harry had spent the evening watching his godfather breathe against a curse that would not fully leave him, and both of them had understood the same thing at the same hour. Which was that the world was never going to be quiet enough, that there was no safe later coming in which to say the things, that there was only now and the cold roof and each other. I've loved you since I was 8 years old, Hermione said, because she was Hermione, and if a thing had to be said, she would say it first and say it exactly. I didn't have the word for it then, I have it now. I've had it for years and I kept not saying it because there was always a reason, the training, the war, the danger, and I've just realized tonight doing the arithmetic on the right that I've been saving it for a safe time, and there isn't going to be a safe time, there was never going to be, and I'm not going to be a person who dies with it unsaid because she was waiting for a war to end. She looked at him steady, the cleverest and bravest person he knew. So, I love you. You're the wall and I'm the mind, and I have loved you my whole life, and I would like, before whatever's coming comes, for that to be a said thing instead of a saved one. Harry looked at the girl who had reorganized his whole life the day she reorganized the library, and he did the thing he had done since he was 7, which was to close the small distance between them without weighing it, and he took her cold hand in both of his the way he had on a rock in front of a tapestry a lifetime ago, and he said, I know. I've known since the bookshop, I think, I just didn't have the word either. I've spent 10 years being a wall so that you'd have somewhere safe to think. I'd spend 10,000 more. There was never anyone else. There was never going to be. It's you. It's been you since you told me to practice saying your name. And he leaned his forehead against hers, gently, the two of them wrapped in one blanket against the London cold, and he did not kiss her yet, because some things you approach the way you approach anything sacred, slowly and with the whole of your attention, and there would be time, they decided without words, they would make there be time, they would go into the dark and give the world back its ending, and they would make there be time for this on the other side of it. The stars were thin and cold above the fortress. Below them the house that had been built on a lie of purity slept full of the impure and the cast out and the loved, and on its roof the 2 heirs sat wrapped in one blanket, having finally said the thing, and it was, for one held hour before the end, enough. Far away in the cold house that had been the Riddles, a torn and scattered man sat alone among his loyal dead things and felt nothing at all, because he had made certain long ago that he would never feel a thing like the thing on that roof. It was the one economy he had never questioned. It was going to be the whole of his undoing. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. The stand. They came to the cold house on the last night of the year, and they did not come quietly, because there was no longer any use in quiet. Bellatrix had planned it as she planned everything completely, but at the center of the plan was a thing that could not be planned, which was that the last of the war was going to be a single fight in a single place, and that all her 16 years of preparing had come down to whether the 3 of them, on this one night, were exactly what she had made them. The house that had been the Riddles stood on its hill above a dead village, ringed with the Dark Lord's people and the Dark Lord's wards, a black shape against a blacker sky, and inside it, at the center of everything, waited the last two pieces of a torn soul, a great snake that never left him, and the man himself. She did not bring an army, though the House of Black could have raised one. An army would have died on the wards, and armies were slow, and this was work for a blade and not a hammer. She brought the ones the right required, and the ones who would not be left behind. Harry at the front, the wall. Hermione beside him, the mind, the map of the last two threads burning behind her eyes. Serious, gray, and diminished, and utterly unwilling to be anywhere else, because a Lord Black went where his heirs went, and no curse in his chest was going to change that. Andromeda, a step behind, because there would be wounds, and she was the one who mended them. And Bellatrix at the head of all of them, going toward the man who had made her, to give him back the death he had scattered across the world to escape. When we are through the wards, we do not stop, she told them in the dark at the foot of the hill. Not for anyone who falls, not for anyone who calls. We are a blade, and a blade does not stop halfway into the wound. Harry and Hermione, you have one task, and it is the only task that matters tonight. Reach the center and do the right. Everything else that any of us does, every curse I throw, and every wound your godfather takes, and every wall I build, exists only to buy you the minute you need to do the right. Do not spend yourselves on the fight. The fight is mine. The right is yours. Hold to that when it gets loud, and it's going to get very loud. She looked at each of them once, the way you look at people you may not look at again. I have been the wall in front of you for 16 years. Tonight I am the wall one more time. Get behind me, all of you, and stay there until the moment your sister tells you it is time to step out from behind me and end it. Then you step out and you do not look back at me, whatever you see, whatever you hear. You look forward at him and you finish it. That is the whole of the plan. That is the whole of everything I have taught you. Now we go. The wards broke against Bellatrix the way everything had always broken against Bellatrix, which was completely and fast, and then they were inside the ring, and the night came apart into fire. The Dark Lord's people met them in the grounds, and there were many of them, and they were the best he had left, and it did not matter, because they had never in their lives fought the thing the House of Black had become. Bellatrix went through them at the front like a door closing, and Harry beside her was a wall that walked, a moving shield that turned every curse meant for the family and gave nothing back but ground taken. And behind the wall Hermione's mind did the killing work of geometry, reading the fight 3 moves ahead, turning the ground to ice under the wrong foot and the air to glass in front of the wrong wand, so that men fell without ever seeing the hand that felled them. Sirius fought at the left, slower than he had been, cursed and gray, but a black in his blood and terrible with it, and Andromeda came behind, mending what could be mended and closing the eyes of what could not. Halfway up the grounds the fight nearly turned, and it turned on the man the Dark Lord had left to hold the line, the same lieutenant who had taken Hermione from the fortress threshold a month before, a careful, patient wizard who had spent that month studying the way the House of Black fought and had found, he believed, its seam. He had understood what none of the others had bothered to understand, which was that the wall and the mind were one weapon and could not be beaten while they stood together, and so he did what the Dark Lord himself would later do in the center room. He did not attack the heirs. He drove a wedge. He threw a wall of black fire across the grounds between Harry and Hermione and the rest of them, meaning to cut the 2 children off in the open and take them apart alone, and for one moment the family was split, Harry and Hermione on one side of the fire and Bellatrix and Sirius and Andromeda on the other, and the lieutenant's people closed on the isolated heirs from 3 sides at once. It was a good plan. It would have worked on anyone Bellatrix had not spent 16 years making. Because the heirs did not panic at being cut off, and that was the whole of the lieutenant's error. He had trained a month to split the wall from the mind, and he had never understood that the wall and the mind were not 2 people who fought well together, but one thing that had grown up in 2 bodies, and that cutting them into 2 bodies did not cut the thing in half, it only gave it 2 fronts. Harry set his back to the fire and became a wall on the far side of it, holding the 3 wands that came at them, and Hermione, cut off with him, did not reach for Bellatrix through the flame, did not waste a second wishing the family whole. She read the ground on her side of the fire in the pitiless half-instant she had, and she turned the lieutenant's own black fire against its maker, reaching into the working of it with the deep understanding of a girl who had taken apart magic older than this since she was 10, and she unmade his fire from the inside and let it fall, and in the same motion the wedge he had driven became the wedge that impaled him. The family closing back into one thing across the collapsing flame with the lieutenant caught in the middle of the closing, and Bellatrix took him as the fire died, fast and final, for the month he had cost her daughter, and did not slow her step to do it. Do not split them, she said to no one, to the dead man, to the memory of every enemy who had ever tried. Everyone tries to split them. It is the last mistake they make. And she went on up the grounds, and the family closed around her, one thing again, and the doors of the cold house stood open ahead. They did not stop. That was the thing Bellatrix had drilled into them, and the thing that carried them, that they did not stop, not when a curse clipped Sirius and put him briefly on one knee, not when the numbers seemed for a moment to close over them, not when the house ahead threw open its doors and more of them came pouring out. A blade does not stop halfway into the wound. They cut toward the center of the house, the five of them, a single moving thing with 16 years of trust holding it together, and one by one the Dark Lords best fell away behind them, and the doors of the cold house stood open ahead, and beyond the doors was the dark room at the center where the last two threads of the war waited. Bellatrix reached the doors first and stopped in them and held up a hand, and the family stopped behind her, breathing hard, bloodied whole. "He is inside," she said. She did not need the mark to tell her. The mark was screaming on her arm, but she would have known anyway, the old low hum of him filling the spaces in her one last time. "The snake is with him. This is the room, my loves. This is the last room. Behind me now, all of you." And when Hermione says the word, the two of you step out and you finish it, and you do not look back. She looked at Harry and Hermione, the wall and the mind, 17 years old and covered in the night's work and unbroken. "I love you both," she said, which she had never once said in those words in 16 years, because she did not have those words, because her love had always been a thing of gestures and guarded doors and honey pots set at an elbow. She said it now because the door ahead was the last one. "There, I have said it, now get behind me and let me do the thing I am for." They went in. The room at the center of the cold house was large and bare and cold, and he was waiting in it on a high seat at the far end, and the great snake was coiled at the foot of the seat, and he did not rise when they came in. "Bellatrix," Voldemort said. He looked at her across the room, thin and white and terrible, the torn core of him worn like a body, and there was in his voice a thing she had never heard there before, which was that he had understood at last that she was not coming home. "You destroyed my locket, my cup, my diadem, my ring. I felt each of them go. I did not believe it at first that anyone living knew what they were, let alone how to unmake them, and then I understood that the girl had seen the cup in the gaunt house, and that the House of Black of all the houses in the world had kept the old tracing arts, and that I had been undone not by Dumbledore, not by the Ministry, not by any power I ever troubled to fear, but by you, by my Bellatrix, by the woman I made." Red eyes moved over the family arrayed behind her, the wall and the mind and the wounded lord. "You have taken 4 pieces of me out of the world, there are 2 left, and you have come here into the center of everything I have to take them, which means you have finally understood what I understood 16 years ago, which is that this only ever ends with one of us dead in a room. So, here is the room. Let us see, Bella, which of us built the better weapon. I made a storm, you made a hearth. We are about to find out which one wins." "We already have," Bellatrix said. "You simply have not been told yet." And Hermione behind her said one word low, the word they had agreed on, and it was not a battle cry, it was a name, it was Harry's name, and it meant it is time, and the 2 heirs of the House of Black stepped out from behind the woman who had raised them, and knelt on the cold floor of the center room, and began the last of the rite. The unmaking was not a spell that could be cast at a distance, and it was not a curse that could be turned. It was a working, a thing built and held, and it took both of them, and it took everything they had. Hermione knelt and reached, her mind going out along the last 2 threads, the snake and the torn core, finding them, taking hold, as she had taken hold of the scattered pieces from a room in Grimmauld Place. Only these were not hidden and quiet, these were awake and aware and fighting back, and the fighting back of a torn soul that knew it was being unmade was a thing that would have shattered a lesser mind in a heartbeat. Harry knelt behind her with his hands on her shoulders and was the wall, the anchor, holding her to her own body while she walked her mind into the thing that wanted to scatter her with it. And he had never in his life held anything harder, and he did not falter, because faltering was not a thing the wall did. And Voldemort turned the whole of himself on stopping them. He rose from the seat at last, and the room filled with the worst magic any of them had ever stood inside, the concentrated murder of a wizard who had beaten death and did not intend to meet it now. And he sent it not at the heirs because he was clever, he had always been clever. He sent it at the thing between him and the heirs, which was Bellatrix, because he understood the right now. He could see the shape of it. He could see that the 2 children doing the working were shielded behind the woman. And he understood that if he could not reach past her, the working would finish and he would end. And so he turned 3 centuries of accumulated dark power on the single task of getting through Bellatrix Black. She did not move. That was the whole of it in the end, the thing 16 years had been building toward. He threw at her everything he had ever learned in a long, unnatural life. Curses that had no names, magic that ate at the edges of the world, the full weight of the most dangerous wizard who had ever lived, and Bellatrix stood in front of her heirs in the center of the cold house and did not move. She was not stronger than him. No one was stronger than him. That had always been the fact at the center of the war, but strength had never been the thing the wall was made of. The wall was made of refusal, of a decision taken in a nursery 16 years before and kept every day since, and she stood in the storm of his power and refused to fall. And every second she refused was a second Hermione's mind walked deeper into the torn soul and Harry's hands held her there, and the right climbed toward its finish on the back of a woman who would not go down. It cost her. Of course it cost her. The wall is only ever as good as what it is willing to spend, and Bellatrix spent everything. The curses got through her guard, one and then another, because no guard holds forever against that much dark. And she took them standing, and she kept standing, and the blood came, and still she did not move, because behind her the two children she had lifted out of a cot and off a bookshop floor were finishing the work of giving the world back its ending, and there was no force in this world or the next, she had told a frightened boy once, that keeps me from standing in the door for you, not the ministry. Not the whole order of Merlin, not death itself when it comes, and death was coming now, she could feel it coming, and she had made it the one law she could not break, and she did not break it. Nearly, Hermione gasped from the floor, her mind fathoms deep in the thing that was unmaking under her hands. The snake is gone, one left, him, I have hold of the last of him, Harry, hold me, I'm going in for the last of it now. And Voldemort, understanding that he had one moment left before the working closed, put the whole of the last of his power into a single curse, and aimed it not at the heirs and not at the wall but through the wall, a thing built to tear through Bellatrix and take the two children behind her in the same stroke, and it was enough, it was more than enough, it was a killing weight that no refusal could turn. And Bellatrix saw it come and understood that this was the second she had bought 16 years ago in a dead woman's nursery, the second she had always known was somewhere ahead of her, and she opened her arms to take the whole of it into herself so that none of it would reach the children behind her, and she did not move, and she did not close her eyes, and she was not afraid, which surprised her at the very end to find that she was not afraid. She did not have to take it. Because the children did not stay behind the wall. Harry had one law too, and he had kept it as long as she had, and it was the same law worn into him from the other side. He had spent his whole life being told you always come back, and he had spent his whole life saying it back to her, and somewhere under the words, deeper than the words, he had learned the thing the words were really about, which was that in this family the ones who love you stand in front of you and do not move. She had taught him that, she had taught it to him with her body for 16 years on a rock in the dawn in front of a cellar door, and she had taught it so well that when the killing weight came through the wall toward the two of them, Harry Black did not do the thing she had told him to do, which was to look forward and finish the rite and not look back. He looked back. He let go of Hermione's shoulders for the first and only time, and he threw himself forward instead, past the wall in front of the wall, and he raised the deepest shield he had ever built in his life. The wall that had taken a door off its hinges without breaking it, grown up into a thing that could turn the murder of a god, and he put it not in front of himself but in front of her, in front of Bellatrix, the two of them changing places in the single second the curse took to cross the room. The child stepping in front of the guardian, 16 years reversed in a heartbeat. And Hermione, her hands suddenly empty of Harry's steadying grip, her mind fathoms deep in the last thread of the torn soul and no longer anchored, did the thing that finished everything because she understood it in the instant it happened, understood it as she understood all things, faster and truer than anyone alive. The rite had never needed a sacrifice. That had been the family's old dark assumption, the purity-poisoned belief that the deepest magic must be paid for in a life, that a wall must die to hold. It was wrong. It had always been wrong. The rite needed the thing the House of Black had never once had in 300 years of trying, and it was not a death, it was the opposite of a death. It was love that stands in front of what it loves and is answered, love reciprocated, the wall protected by the ones it shields, given freely in both directions at once. And in the second Harry threw himself in front of Bellatrix, she felt the whole working blaze up complete under her hands, because the last ingredient had just walked into the room, and it was the exact thing Voldemort had spent his whole existence tearing himself apart to never feel. "He can't hold," Hermione said, and her voice was not a gasp any longer, it rang. It filled the cold room because the magic was pouring through her now, the finished rite, 3 heirs worth of the House of Black's redeemed and reforged blood magic, built of chosen kinship and answered love and a family that stood in front of each other in both directions. He tore himself to pieces so he'd never have to feel this. He made himself a thing that couldn't love so nothing could ever reach the center of him. And that's the hole in him, Harry, that's been the whole time. He built himself with no door, and a thing with no door can't keep anything out because it has nothing to keep. We're the thing he can't survive. We were always going to be the thing he couldn't survive. Now, the unmaking closed. It did not look like triumph. It looked like a thing coming apart that had held itself together too long by unnatural means. Voldemort's last curse broke against Harry's shield, the shield that stood in front of Bellatrix, and it held because Harry, who had been a wall since he was 3 years old, had grown into a wall that could turn the murder of a god when the god's murder was aimed at someone he loved. And in the same moment the rite closed around the torn core of the Dark Lord, the last thread of him held fast in Hermione's mind, and the magic the three of them had made, the answered love the House of Black had bred 3 centuries to be able to make and never once managed until this exact family in this exact room, poured into the hole at the center of him, the door he had never built, the emptiness he had scattered himself across the world to protect. There was nothing to protect. That was his end. He had made himself immune to the one thing that could reach him, and in doing so had made himself into a thing that was mostly whole, and when the finished rite found the hole there was no soul left whole enough to resist it, only fragments, only the torn and lessened remainder of a man who had thrown away everything that could have held him together in exchange for a deathlessness that turned out, at the very last, to be the thinnest and most brittle thing of all. He came apart the way the locket had come apart, the way the cup and the diadem and the ring had come apart, unmade, ended, the scattered pieces called home and found wanting and let go. And the thin white terrible shape at the center of the cold house thinned further and paled and was, between one second and the next, simply gone, the way a pressure goes when a storm has passed, the way a hum goes quiet, the way the mark had gone quiet on a November night 16 years before. Only this time it did not sleep, this time it ended. Bellatrix felt the mark on her arm go cold and still and dead, truly dead, the black lines fading toward the gray of an old scar, and she knew in the deepest place she knew anything that it was over, that he was not gone as he had been gone before, that there was no scattered piece left anywhere in the world to climb back from, that the thing she had served and the thing she had spent 16 years standing in front of her children to protect them from was at last, simply and finally, dead. And then her legs went out from under her, because a wall that has spent everything falls when the thing it held against is gone, and she went down onto the cold floor of the center room, and the curses she had taken standing were suddenly allowed to be the wounds they were. "No," Harry said. "No, no, no, you don't get to. You said you always come back. You said it to me 1,000 times. You don't get to say it 1,000 times and then not." He had her before she reached the floor, the wall become the thing that catches, and he was shouting for Andromeda, and Andromeda was already there, already on her knees, her healer's hands moving over the wounds with the fast, terrible focus of a woman who has done this before and is doing it now for her own blood. Hermione came out of the right gray and emptied and dragged herself across the floor to them and took Bellatrix's cold hand in both of hers, the way Bellatrix had once been taken by a child's hand in a strange dark house. And Sirius, gray and cursed and undefeated, put himself at the door of the room to guard it, because someone had to guard the door now that the one who always guarded the door was on the floor, and it was right, in a way none of them had the words for that night. That the Lord Black should stand in the door while the family that had grown back around him fought to keep the woman who had made it grow. She was very badly hurt. Andromeda's face said it before her words did, the same face she had worn over Sirius in the gaunt house, the face a healer cannot hide. But she had been fast and she had been good, she had always been the one of them who could mend a thing, and Bellatrix Black did not die on the floor of the cold house, though she came nearer to it that night than she had come to anything, nearer than the nursery, nearer than the rock, nearer than any of the 100 nights she had stood in the door. She had spent everything holding the wall, and there had very nearly been nothing left, and what pulled her back from the edge of it was not Andromeda's hands alone, though those did the mending. It was the two of them, the wall and the mind, kneeling over her on the cold floor and refusing, as she had taught them to refuse, refusing to let her go, saying the oldest law of their family back to her in the words she had first said it to them. "You come back," Harry said into her gray face, gripping her as she had once gripped a frightened child in the dark. "That's the law, that's the one law you made, and you don't get to be the one who breaks it. You come back through the door, we're right here, we're the door, come back through it." And Bellatrix, from somewhere very far down, from the edge of the thing she had opened her arms to take, heard the law she had made read back to her in the voice of the child she had made it for, and she did the thing she had promised him she would always do, the one thing she had made unbreakable, and she came back. She woke properly for the first time 3 days later in the area in her own bed on the rock, and the first thing she saw was that they had not left. She had half expected them to have left. It was the old fear, the deepest and stupidest one, the one the locket had tried to use on her, that the children had only ever needed her wand and would be gone the moment the war ended and the wand was spent. She woke on the rock with her body a single deep ache, and the mark on her arm faded to the gray of an old scar, and she turned her head expecting an empty room, and the room was not empty. Harry was asleep in the chair by the bed, folded into it badly, his neck at an angle that was going to cost him in the morning, and he had been there, she understood from the state of him, for most of 3 days. And Hermione was asleep on the floor with her back against the bed and a book open face down on her chest, a book about curse damage and its long healing, which meant she had spent the 3 days doing the thing she did with fear, which was to reach for the part of it that could be studied. They had not left, they had done the opposite of leaving. They had come to the rock and sat by the bed and refused to go, the way she had once stood over a fevered child and refused to go, and she lay in the gray dawn and looked at the two of them keeping watch over her in their sleep, and she understood, finally and completely, that the fear had always been a lie, that she had been kept, that she had been someone's return for 16 years and was one now. Harry woke because she moved, as he had woken to every wrong thing since he was 3. His eyes found hers and something went out of him all at once, 3 days of holding, and he did not say anything clever or brave, he was too tired for either. He just reached out and took her hand off the coverlet and held it hard, the way a person holds a thing that nearly went over an edge. "You came back," he said, his voice was wrecked. "I always come back." It came out of her cracked and quiet, and she meant it more than she had ever meant anything. "It is the one law, Harry, I made it, I do not break it." She looked at him, and at Hermione stirring now on the floor, waking all at once and immediately alert, reaching for the situation before she had reached for consciousness. Though I confess I came the nearest I have ever come to breaking it in that cold house. I opened my arms to the thing. I had made my peace with the door. And then two children I raised to look forward looked back instead and caught me and read me my own law and would not let me go. She turned her hand over in Harry's and gripped it back what strength she had. You disobeyed me, both of you. I told you not to look back, whatever you saw, whatever you heard, and you looked back at the worst possible moment and nearly cost yourselves everything to do it. Yes, Hermione said from the floor, unrepentant, pulling herself up to sit against the bed. We did, and we'd do it again. You taught us the rule wrong on purpose, you know. You taught us that the ones who love you stand in front of you and don't move, and then you told us it only ran one direction from you to us, and that was the lie. That was the only thing you ever lied to us about. It runs both ways or it isn't real. We were always going to look back. You made sure of it. You just didn't plan on being the one it saved. She rested her head against the edge of the mattress near her guardian's hand. You should have. It was in the arithmetic the whole time. I'd have shown you if you'd asked. It was always going to run both ways. Bellatrix looked at the two of them, the wall and the mind, keeping their watch over her in the gray dawn on the rock, and she did not have a name for what she felt, so she did not try to give it one. She only held on to Harry's hand, and let Hermione rest her head near it and lay still and let herself, for once in her long and terrible life, be the thing that was guarded instead of the thing that guarded, and found that she could bear it, and that it was, in fact, the whole of what she had been fighting 16 years to earn. It was spring before she was fully herself again, and by then the world had changed around them in ways none of them had planned and all of them had earned. The war ended the night the cold house went quiet, though it took the wizarding world some weeks to believe it, the way it takes a body some time to believe the fever has broken. The ministry the ledger keepers had stolen came apart without the thing at its center, and the ones who had fought under the black name found themselves, to their own surprise, the ones left standing to rebuild it, and the House of Black, which had spent 300 years being a byword for pure-blood cruelty and had spent 16 years secretly becoming its opposite, found itself at the end the most trusted name in Britain, which was a joke Bellatrix appreciated more than anyone and said so. From the chair by the window where Andromeda made her rest longer than she wanted to rest, Sirius carried the curse in his chest for the rest of his life, and lived a long one anyway, Lord Black at the head of a family remade, loud and free and unbearable about all of it, exactly as James would have been. Andromeda's door, which had opened one winter night for a dying child and a sister she had every reason to turn away, never closed again, and Ted taught a second generation to fish, and Nymphadora, grown now, laughed at all of them impartially. The Grangers came home from the safe corner Ted had hidden them in, and Mrs. Granger and Bellatrix sat together in the spring garden and said very little, in the manner of two women who had long ago agreed that the deepest things are the ones you leave unsaid, and it was enough. And the tapestry hung on the wall of the Eyrie with its top left blank, the old cruel motto unpicked and gone, the space above the family waiting the way the space below it had once waited, for a new word, a true one, that they had not yet earned the right to weave. They earned it in the spring. Harry found Hermione on the flat shelf of rock above the Eyrie, where they had learned to duel on the first warm evening of the year, and the valley was going gold at its edges the way it had gone gold the first morning 16 years before, though neither of them had been there to see that one. They were 17 and the war was over, and there was, at last, a world quiet enough to say the things in. You stepped in front of her, Hermione said. She had said it several times in the weeks since, worrying at it as she worried at everything. You let go of my shoulders in the middle of the right. If I'd been half a second slower understanding why the working blazed up, I'd have been lost out there, scattered with him. You let go of the anchor. She looked at him, the cleverest and bravest person he knew, and there was no accusation in it, only the thing underneath the accusation. You could have killed us both. You did the one thing she told us never to do. You looked back. I looked back, Harry agreed. I'll always look back. That's the thing she never quite understood about what she taught me, that she taught it too well, that a person who learns to stand in front of what he loves and never move learns it in both directions, and I was never going to stand there and finish a spell while she died to let me. Not for the world, not for the end of him, not for anything. He took her hand the way he had since they were children, without weighing it. You'd have done the same. You did do the same. You're the one who worked out that it was never a sacrifice, that the right wanted us to protect each other and not die for each other, and you worked it out in half a second with your hands full of the worst thing in the world. We looked back at the same time. That's the whole of us, Hermione. We look back. We're each other's door. Hermione looked at him in the gold light, and then she did the thing they had been not doing since a roof under thin London stars, since a rock in front of a tapestry, since a bookshop floor a whole lifetime ago. And she closed the small distance that was the only distance left between them, and she kissed him, and he kissed her back, the wall and the mind, on the rock where they had learned to guard each other in the last of the gold light, and it was gentle, and it was long in coming, and it was theirs. And there was, at last, all the time in the world for it. Behind them, in the doorway of the house, Bellatrix stood and watched her two heirs become the last thing they were ever going to become to each other, and she did not go to them because it was their moment and not hers, and she had learned at the very last the difference. She only guarded the door, which was the thing she was for, and which she was still just strong enough to do, and would be strong enough to do for a long while yet. That night when the two of them came in from the rock, they found her at the tapestry with her wand out, and the blank space at the top of the old tree glowing where she had been working, and they came and stood on either side of her, the way they had stood in front of that wall as small children, and looked up at the new word she had woven into the place where the old cruelty had hung for 300 years. It was not Latin. She had considered Latin and rejected it because Latin was the language the old lies had been told in. She had woven instead in plain gold thread in the plain words the family used now, three of them, the truest three she owned, the ones she had spent 16 years learning how to mean. We come back. It is not grand, Bellatrix said, looking up at it, the wall and the mind on either side of her, the tapestry full of burned names above them and two living names at the bottom, and a whole family grown back around a tree that had been dying when she found it. The old one was grand, Tauger's purr, grand and pure, and it ate everyone who ever lived under it. This one is not grand, it is only true. It is the one thing we have all done for each other, every one of us, from a dead nursery to a cold house, through 16 years in a war. We come back through every door for each other, always. She lowered her wand. It will do. It is the House of Black, and it is finally worth the name, and it's the only monument I want, and I have wanted a great many terrible things in my life, so believe me when I tell you I know the difference at last between a terrible thing wanted and a good one. The three of them stood in front of the wall in the last of the light, and above them the two words that had ruled a family into ruin hung unpicked and gone, and three new ones hung in their place, plain and gold and true, and below them the House of Black went on, remade, impure, cast out, kept and loved, and very much alive. Chapter 7 End.